You thought nobody'd noticed $300 missing from this wallet, boy? The leather wallet lands on the hood of the patrol car, slapping hot metal. Inside it, a Mississippi driver's license catches the afternoon sun. The governor's face, laminated and official, staring up at a sky that doesn't care about what's happening beneath it. A knee presses between shoulder blades. Zip ties ratchet tight around wrists, too tight, the plastic biting into skin until circulation starts to fade. The asphalt behind the Bolivar County Sheriff's Office radiates heat that smells like tar and something chemical, and the man face down on it doesn't make a sound. Not one sound. Sheriff Wade Hensley stands over him with his arms crossed, boots planted wide, casting a shadow that doesn't quite reach the man's face. He has the posture of someone who has done this before and expects to do it again without consequence. $817. The voice from the ground is steady. No tremor, no pleading, just numbers, stated like evidence. That's what was in the wallet when I picked it up. Hensley's jaw tightens. He didn't expect precision. He expected stammering, tears, maybe a run for it. Something that would justify the knee and the zip ties, and the two deputies flanking the patrol car with their hands resting on their belts. $512, Hensley says. That's what I counted. $512. So either you can't add, or you helped yourself to $305 before you walked in my door. The man on the ground closes his eyes, not in defeat, in calculation. He counts the cruisers in the lot by the sound of their idling engines. 3 marked units, 1 unmarked sedan, parked at the far end near the dumpsters. His ear catches a trunk being shut. A heavy object sliding across a cargo liner. A crate. He knows that crate. He's been tracking it for 11 weeks. The dispatch radio on Hensley's hip crackles. Bolivar Dispatch, log entry 7419. August 11th, 2:27 p.m. Complainant Sheriff Hensley. Report of suspected larceny from found property. Subject, black male, mid-20s, Tiller Road address. Responding unit Deputy Corbin, badge 406. The sheriff of Bolivar County filed a theft complaint against a man for returning a wallet. That wallet belongs to the governor of Mississippi, and the man with his face in the asphalt, hands bound, shoulder blades grinding under a deputy's knee, every instinct in his body screaming to identify himself, says nothing, because the wallet was never the point. It was never going to be the point. The crate disappears into the unmarked sedan. The engine turns over. The sedan pulls out of the lot, gravel popping under its tires, and nobody writes down the plate number. Nobody except the man on the ground. Bravo Victor, 7311. Mississippi commercial registration, memorized in the 2 seconds between blinks that the deputy's knee allowed him. If you've ever been punished for doing the right thing, this story is going to hit different. Like and subscribe, because what happens to this man over the next 48 hours will test everything you believe about justice. 72 hours earlier, Calvary Creek, Mississippi was exactly what it had been for the last 40 years. A place people left and never came back to. Population sign at the town limit reads 1,214, but that number is generous. Half the houses on the east side sit empty, porches caving inward, windows covered with plywood that's gone gray from weather. The other half hold people who stay because leaving costs money they don't have. The Bolivar County Delta stretches flat in every direction. Cotton fields and soybean rows, running to a horizon that shimmers with heat 9 months out of the year. No hills, no shade. Nothing to break the wind or the monotony except the water tower, the grain elevator, and the Ewing pecan processing plant, the largest employer within 30 miles and the only reason the post office hasn't closed. Callan Briggs rents a single-wide trailer on Tiller Road for $400 a month, cash paid to a landlord in Cleveland who's never visited the property. The trailer is 23 years old, with a window AC unit that sounds like it's digesting gravel and a front step made from a cinder block. He moved in 3 months ago with a duffel bag, a toolbox, and a 2004 Chevy Silverado with rust eating through the wheel wells. He told people he was from Jackson, looking for quiet, good with his hands. 5:15 in the morning. The alarm on his phone chirps twice before his hand finds it in the dark. He doesn't hit snooze, feet on the floor, sheets pulled tight, corners tucked at 45 degrees, the kind of crisp geometry that belongs in an inspection line, not a rented trailer in the Mississippi Delta. He runs his palm across the surface once, checking the tension, then moves to the kitchen. Oatmeal, standing at the counter. Black coffee in a mug with no handle. While the water heats, he opens a pocket notebook, spiral-bound, dog-eared, filled with abbreviations and tight handwriting that could be supply lists for a handyman business. Quantities, dates, locations, letters and numbers grouped in clusters that don't correspond to any hardware code. He writes a new entry. R8, 8/8, NC Pres, HVH, window 2 weeks. Then closes the notebook and slides it into his back pocket. By 5:45, he's on the levee road. 3 miles out, 3 miles back. The sky shifts from black to purple to orange, while his boots hit packed dirt at a rhythm that never varies. Not faster on hills, not slower on flats. Controlled, metronomic. The kind of endurance that isn't built by jogging. It's built by being told you don't get to stop. Back at the trailer, he showers, dresses in work clothes, canvas pants, steel-toed boots, a faded gray t-shirt, and pulls a laminated card from the false bottom of a toolbox under his bed. He looks at it for exactly 3 seconds. Doesn't read it. Just touches its edge with his thumb, like confirming it's still there. Then he puts it back, replaces the false bottom, slides the toolbox under the bed, and walks out into the Mississippi morning. His first job today is replacing rotted porch boards for Miss Odette Gaskin on Cedar Lane. Miss Odette is 78, widowed, and one of the few people in Calvary Creek who treats Callan like a human being rather than a question that needs answering. She pays in cash and biscuits. The cash is $40 for a full day's work. The biscuits are worth more. The drive to Miss Odette's takes 4 minutes. Callan passes the hardware store on Main Street. Teague's Supply, owned by Burl Teague, whose grandfather built it and whose opinions about who belongs in this town haven't evolved since. Inside, Callan sets a box of 3-inch deck screws and a tube of wood filler on the counter. Burl Teague is helping a woman in a sun hat pick out spray paint. Callan waits. A man in overalls walks in, nods at Burl, and Burl waves him over. Callan waits. A teenage boy comes in for a bag of ice, and Burl rings him up. Callan waits. 7 minutes. 3 customers served out of order. The box of screws sits on the counter untouched. "Whenever you're ready," Callan says. Not loud, not angry, just present. Burl glances at him like he's noticing the weather. 12:47. No eye contact, no bag. Callan pays, leaves, logs the interaction nowhere except in the part of his brain that catalogs patterns. Who gets served, who gets skipped, whose money is welcome and whose money is tolerated. Miss Odette's porch takes most of the morning. The boards are worse than he estimated. Subflooring is soft, joists are borderline. He reinforces 2 of them with scrap lumber, replaces 4 boards, sands the edges, works quietly. Miss Odette brings sweet tea at 10 and watches from her rocking chair. "You do good work," she says. "Precise. Most handymen around here eyeball everything. You measure twice." She pauses. 3 times, actually. I've been counting. Callan smiles, doesn't explain. Measures the next board. By noon, the porch is done. Miss Odette hands him 2 20s and a plate wrapped in foil. "I put extra honey on the biscuits," she says. "You're too thin. Whatever you're eating at that trailer, it ain't enough." He thanks her and drives to the Ewing Pecan processing plant to check on a bid he submitted 2 weeks ago. HVAC ductwork repair in the sorting facility. The plant foreman, a heavy-set man named Griff, meets him at the gate. We went another direction. Griff doesn't meet his eyes. "Can I ask who got it?" "Contractor out of Greenville. Owner's preference." Griff shrugs, like the decision exists in a realm beyond his influence. "Nothing personal." Callan nods. Drives past the plant on his way out and sees the Greenville contractor's truck in the loading bay. White guy, out-of-county plates. Bid probably double what Callan quoted. Patrice Ewing's preference isn't about price. It's about familiarity. About who she considers safe enough to let inside her walls. The afternoon errand is diesel from the gas station on Route 8. The attendant, a teenager named Cody, pumps it without issue. But the station owner, Darren Bax, comes out of the office and leans against the doorframe. "Briggs, right? You the handyman on Tiller?" "That's right. Heard you been real busy. Lot of houses, lot of back and forth." Darren's tone is casual, but his eyes are doing inventory. The truck bed, the tools, the route pattern. "Where'd you say you're from?" "Jackson." "Mm-hmm." Darren nods slowly, the way people nod when they're filing information, rather than accepting it. "Well, pump 3's yours whenever you need it." Callan pays and pulls out. In his rearview mirror, Darren is already on his phone. 4:17 p.m. Route 8, 2 miles north of town. A Believer County Sheriff's cruiser appears behind the Silverado. Lights come on. No siren, just the flashers. Callan pulls over immediately, hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, window already down by the time the deputy reaches his door. Deputy Nash Corbin, mid-40s, Wire-rimmed glasses over hard eyes. Former Army MP. The kind of background that makes a man precise about procedure when he wants to be and creative about it when he doesn't. License and registration. Colin hands them over without being asked twice. Corbin studies the license, studies Callan, studies the license again. Says here, Jackson, you been in Calvary Creek 3 months now? About that. What kind of work you do? Handyman, repairs, odd jobs? I'm on the county business registry. A lot of Jackson boys end up in trouble down here. Corbin hands the license back. You got a taillight out. Callan checks his mirrors. Both taillights are lit, red and clear, reflecting off Corbin's cruiser grill. He doesn't point this out, doesn't argue, doesn't do anything except say, I'll take a look at it. Thank you, Deputy. Corbin holds his gaze for 3 seconds longer than necessary, then walks back to his cruiser. The flashers go off. The cruiser pulls around and continues north. Callan exhales, drives home. That night, in the trailer with the shades drawn and the AC grinding, he pulls the toolbox from under the bed, opens the false bottom, the laminated card, an encrypted phone, a micro recorder, a leather-bound journal with no label on the cover. He picks up the encrypted phone, dials a number from memory, 4 rings, 5, 6, voicemail, an automated tone, clipped and institutional, no name, no greeting. Just a beep. He hangs up without leaving a message. This is the 15th time he's called in 6 weeks. The 15th time, nobody's answered. His handler rotated out on June 28th. The replacement was supposed to make contact by July 5th. Today is August 8th. He opens the journal. Writes in the same tight abbreviations. FFL-3 shipment confirmed August 8th. NC present at transfer. Route 8 staging, 1400 approximately. H vehicle not visible, but previous pattern holds. Window closing. Handler non-responsive 42 days. Requesting guidance. No channel available. He closes the journal, stares at the phone for a long time. Then he puts everything back. Replaces the false bottom. Slides the toolbox under the bed. Turns off the light. Lies on sheets pulled tight enough to bounce a coin off of. Staring at the ceiling in the dark. Running plate numbers and transfer schedules and contingency protocols through his mind until sleep takes him somewhere around 1 in the morning. The pocket notebook on the kitchen counter is open to a page that reads, Bravo Victor, pending. 3 FFL, 2 confirmed. H plus NC plus unknown. 32 days past contact window. Nobody in Calvary Creek knows what those letters mean. Not yet. August 11th, late morning. Temperature already 91 and climbing. Callan finishes rehanging Miss Odette's screen door. The hinges had rusted through, letting mosquitoes colonize her living room for the better part of a week. She pays him $40 and hands him a foil-wrapped plate of biscuits so heavy it requires both hands. You eat those before you get home, she says. Don't you dare refrigerate my biscuits. He smiles, tucks the plate on the passenger seat of the Silverado, and drives toward Main Street to pick up caulk from Teague's Supply. He doesn't make it to the hardware store. At the corner of Main and Courthouse Lane, something catches the light. A rectangle of dark brown leather, half hidden by the curb near the courthouse steps. Callan pulls the truck over, steps out, picks it up. The wallet is thick, expensive, the kind of leather that doesn't come from a department store. Inside, cash, neatly folded, credit cards, business cards on heavy stock, a Mississippi driver's license with a face he recognizes from billboards and news broadcasts. Governor Mitchell Ware. He counts the cash without removing it from the wallet. $817, 5s, 10s, 20s, and a single $100 bill, tucked behind the rest. He counts it twice because accuracy matters more than speed when you're holding something that doesn't belong to you. $817 could cover 2 months' rent, could fix the Silverado's transmission, could buy groceries that aren't oatmeal and canned soup. The math runs through his head automatically, the way poverty trains you to calculate what money means in terms of survival rather than luxury. He closes the wallet. Returning it is the right thing to do. It's also the necessary thing. A theft accusation would invite scrutiny, paperwork, background checks, the kind of institutional attention that would end 3 months of careful work in a single afternoon. Both reasons arrive at the same conclusion. He walks to the sheriff's office. The Bolivar County Sheriff's Department occupies a single-story brick building 2 blocks from the courthouse. Inside, the air conditioning fights a losing war against August. Jolene Fry sits behind the dispatch counter, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and fingernails painted the color of sweet tea. She runs dispatch, manages the front desk, files incident reports, and, in a department with 7 full-time employees, functions as the institutional memory of every complaint, every arrest, and every piece of paper that moves through the building. Callan sets the wallet on the counter. Found this on Main Street near the courthouse steps. There's a driver's license inside. Belongs to Governor Mitchell Ware. Cash total is $817. I didn't remove anything. Jolene opens the wallet, sees the license. Her face does something complicated. Surprise, then recognition, then a rapid series of calculations that end with her picking up the desk phone. "Sheriff, you need to come out here." Wade Hensley emerges from the back office 30 seconds later, coffee cup in hand, wearing the expression of a man whose afternoon has just been interrupted by something beneath his pay grade. He's 53, broad across the shoulders in a way that's migrating toward his belt, with a handshake reputation that's crushed knuckles at every Rotary meeting for 20 years. Former linebacker at Bolivar County High. 3-term sheriff. The kind of man who fills door frames and expects the room to adjust. He sees the wallet, sees Callan. His expression shifts. "Where'd you find this?" "Courthouse Lane." "Near the steps, about 15 minutes ago." Hensley picks up the wallet, opens it, and begins removing bills one at a time, laying them flat on the counter. He counts slowly, deliberately, moving his lips as each bill lands. $512. He looks up. Callan's stomach tightens, but his voice stays level. "There was 817 when I picked it up. I'd like that documented in the intake log." The phrase lands in the room like a foreign object. Intake log. 2 words that belong in a procedural manual, not in the mouth of a handyman in a faded t-shirt. Jolene glances at Callan, then at Hensley. Something flickers across her face. Awareness, maybe, or warning. Hensley sets the wallet down, folds his arms. The coffee cup dangles from one finger. "You telling me how to do my job?" "I'm telling you what was in the wallet." "I just counted it, son. 512. You calling me a liar?" "I'm saying the amount was $817. That's what I'd like on record." Hensley stares at him for a long beat. The AC cycles. Jolene's chair creaks. Then Hensley picks up the wallet and disappears into the back without another word. Jolene turns to her computer screen. "You can go," she says. Callan doesn't move for 3 seconds. He memorizes the time on the wall clock. 1:47 p.m. Notes the position of the intake form Jolene hasn't started filling out. Counts the bills still on the counter. Hensley took the wallet, but left 3 20s and 2 5s sitting in plain view, uncounted, unclaimed, unlogged. He leaves. 90 minutes later, he's loading the last of his tools into the Silverado at Miss Odette's when a cruiser turns onto Cedar Lane with purpose in its trajectory. Not patrolling, not wandering, heading directly for him. Deputy Nash Corbin steps out with his hand already on his service weapon. "Step away from the vehicle. Hands where I can see them." 2 more words Callan has heard before, in different states, different contexts, with different badges saying them. He sets the drill down on the tailgate, raises both hands to shoulder height, and takes 2 steps back from the truck. Corbin approaches with a notepad open, reading from it as if the words aren't already memorized. Complaint filed by Sheriff Wade Hensley. Suspected larceny of $305 from property turned in at the Bolivar County Sheriff's Department. Mississippi Code Section 97-17-41. Petty larceny. The wallet had $817. I turned it in intact. Sheriff counted 512. Corbin flips the notepad shut. Math says you're 305 short. Turn around. The handcuffs are steel, not zip ties. Those come later, at the station, when the processing begins and the camera on the wall blinks its red eye. Corbin's grip on Callan's arm is tighter than necessary, fingers digging into the bicep, steering him toward the cruiser's back seat with the kind of force that says, this isn't about procedure, it's about message. Miss Odette appears on her porch. The screen door, the one Callan just rehung, swings wide behind her. Nash Corbin, what in the world are you doing? Her voice carries the authority of a woman who changed this deputy's diapers 40 years ago. That boy didn't steal a thing. I watched him find that wallet and walk it straight to your office. Straight there. Didn't stop. Didn't hesitate. Corbin doesn't look at her. Ma'am, this is official business. Please step back inside. Official business. Miss Odette grips the porch rail with both hands. You arresting a man for being honest. That's your official business. Corbin opens the cruiser door and guides Callan into the back seat. Hand on the head, the practiced motion of 1,000 arrests. The door shuts with a sound that has a specific weight to it, a finality that separates a free person from a detained one. Through the window, Callan watches Miss Odette standing on her porch. She has her phone in her hand. She's dialing. Corbin pulls out of Cedar Lane. You know, Corbin says, eyes in the rear view, people like you come through here every couple years. Think a small town's easy pickings. Think nobody's paying attention. He adjusts his mirror to center Callan's face in it. We're always paying attention. Callan says nothing. His wrists ache where the cuffs dig into bone. His shoulders twist at an angle that's designed to be uncomfortable. He breathes in through his nose, out through his mouth, the way he was taught to breathe when restraint isn't physical, but strategic. When the instinct to speak must be overridden by the discipline to wait. At the station, they book him. Fingerprints, photograph. Personal effects cataloged, wallet, his own, containing $43. Keys, phone, the regular one, not the encrypted one. The intake form lists the charge. Petty larceny, Mississippi Code. Annotated section 97-17-41, value under $1,000. Bond is set at $500. For a man who earns $40 a day fixing porches, $500 might as well be $5,000. Callan asks for his phone call. Phone's out, Jolene says from behind the counter, not looking up. Been out since noon. The phone on her desk is blinking with an active line. He doesn't point this out. Doesn't argue. Lets them put him in the holding cell. A 6x8 room with a metal bench, a toilet with no seat, and a fluorescent light that buzzes at a frequency designed to prevent sleep. The door closes, the lock engages, and Callan Briggs, sitting on a metal bench in a Mississippi County jail, arrested for returning a wallet, allows himself 5 seconds of closed eyes before his mind resumes its work. The plate number? Bravo Victor 7311. The crate. Corbin's presence at the Route 8 staging on the 8th. Hensley's need to discredit him fast before anyone looks too closely at why a handyman on Tiller Road might be worth framing. They don't know who he is. They just know he's in the way. The fluorescent light buzzes. The bench is cold. Somewhere beyond the wall, Jolene Fry is typing a dispatch entry with a timestamp she'll change 3 times before morning. Miss Odette posted his bond at 7:45 the next morning, counting out $500 in 20s and 10s from a coffee can. She kept under her kitchen sink. Money she'd been saving for a new water heater. Don't you dare feel guilty about it, she told him on the drive home. Her '98 Buick shuddering over every pothole on Tiller Road. A water heater keeps you warm. Doing right keeps you human. I know which one matters more. By the time they reached his trailer, the news had already spread. Calvary Creek runs on 3 information networks: the church bulletin, the plant break room, and Patrice Ewing's phone. Patrice called Griff at the processing plant before the sun finished rising. Griff told the line supervisors. The line supervisors told everyone else. By 8:30 a.m., every person in town who needed work, needed a favor, or needed to stay on the right side of the Ewing family knew that Callan Briggs had been arrested for stealing from the governor's wallet, and that employing him, feeding him, or speaking to him publicly was a choice with consequences. Patrice Ewing held court at the Pecan Growers Co-op that afternoon. The co-op was technically a membership organization, but Patrice chaired it, funded it, and used its monthly meetings the way medieval lords used feast halls, to display power and distribute loyalty. I tried to warn people. Her voice carried the particular warmth of someone performing concern for an audience. You bring in outsiders? This is what happens? Jackson boys? She shook her head slowly, the gesture calibrated to suggest both sadness and vindication. I wouldn't want someone like that around my property, but that's just me. It wasn't just her. Within 24 hours, Callan's phone stopped ringing. The woman on Magnolia Street who'd scheduled a gutter repair didn't answer when he called to confirm. The church deacon who needed a shed roof patched sent a text. 1 line, no greeting. Going a different direction. Thanks. Miss Odette's neighbor, Carl Redmond, had hired Callan to rebuild his fence. 50 yards of post and rail, materials already purchased. Carl showed up at the trailer on the second morning. I can't have you over, Briggs. Carl couldn't look at him. Stared at the cinder block step instead. Patrice controls who works the harvest crew. My boys need those jobs. I understand. Callan said it because it was true. He understood perfectly. Economic coercion dressed as community concern. A woman who controlled the only payroll in town wielding that control like a blade, and everyone around her choosing survival over solidarity. Carl left. Colin stood in his doorway and watched the Silverado's rearview mirror for movement on Tiller Road. Then he went inside and tried the encrypted phone again. Ring, 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 voicemail. 44 days without contact. He needed food. The biscuits were gone. The oatmeal was down to the last serving. So he drove to Calvary Creek General. The only grocery option within 15 miles, a cramped store on Main Street that sold canned goods, bread, and produce that had seen better decades. Patrice Ewing was inside. She stood near the register talking to the store owner, Mabel Crane, a conversation that stopped the instant Callan walked through the door. The bell above the entrance might as well have been an alarm. Patrice turned. She was 62, dressed in linen too expensive for the setting, jewelry too understated to be anything but old money. She ran Calvary Creek the way her family had run it for 3 generations. Not through title, but through dependency. Every paycheck from the pecan plant had her name behind it. Every holiday turkey, every school supply drive, every contribution to the volunteer fire department, Ewing money. She had purchased loyalty so thoroughly that most people didn't realize they'd sold it. Mabel? Patrice didn't take her eyes off Callan. I was just saying, it's so important to know who we're doing business with, don't you think? Mabel Crane looked at the floor. Callan picked up a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter, set them on the counter. Just these. Patrice moved closer, not physically threatening. She was too polished for that. But the proximity was a statement, the way she positioned herself between Callan and the register, body angled to claim the space, the social equivalent of Hensley's forearm across a doorway. You know, I told the co-op, we need to be more careful about who we let into this community. Her voice carried the honeyed authority of someone accustomed to being agreed with. Jackson is a long way from here. People come from Jackson with all kinds of intentions. I came here to work. She tilted her head. And how's that working out for you? The question was a blade wrapped in silk. How's that working out? Meaning, I took your work away. I told every person in this town to freeze you out. You have no income, no allies, no future here. And I did it with 3 phone calls before breakfast. Callan set a $5 bill on the counter. Keep the change, Mabel. He left without waiting for a bag. Patrice watched him through the store window, phone already in hand, already dialing the next call in the sequence that would tighten the noose another inch. He walked to the gas station for water. Darren Bax was behind the counter, saw Callan, glanced at someone outside the frame of the window, a deputy's cruiser parked across the road, idling. Pumps are down, Darren said. Sorry, the pumps weren't down. A white woman had just filled her minivan at pump 2. I just need a bottle of water. Darren considered this. The deputy's cruiser sat outside like a suggestion. Yeah, okay, water's fine, but be quick about it. Callan paid, picked up the bag, turned toward the door. A hand caught the bag from behind, yanking it out of his grip. The water bottle hit the floor and rolled across linoleum. A bag of peanuts he'd grabbed at the counter scattered. Wade Hensley stood behind him, not in uniform, off-duty, wearing a polo shirt and jeans, but carrying his badge clipped to his belt the way some men carry their identity everywhere they go. He'd entered through the back, through the stockroom, like he owned the building. Maybe he did. In Calvary Creek, ownership was a flexible concept. You got nerve. Hensley picked up the bag of peanuts, crushed it in his fist, dropped it on the counter. Walking around my town like you belong here, shopping like a citizen. I paid for those. You paid for them with money you probably stole from somewhere else. Hensley brushed the peanut shells off the counter onto the floor. See, that's your problem, Briggs. You think rules apply the same to you as they do to everybody else. They don't. Not here. Darren Bax watched from behind the register, mouth shut, eyes shifting between the sheriff and the handyman, like a man watching a car accident from too close. Hensley stepped forward. Close. Personal. His hand came up to Callan's chest. Not a shove, not yet. A placement. 2 fingers pressing against the sternum, pushing Callan backward 1 step, then another, until his spine met the glass door of the cooler and the cold seeped through his shirt. You're going to plead guilty on the 19th. You're going to take whatever Osgood gives you, and then you're going to pack your truck and drive back to Jackson and forget this town exists. Hensley's breath smelled like chewing tobacco. That's not advice. That's your itinerary. Callan held his gaze, said nothing. His hands stayed at his sides, though the muscles in his forearms were taut enough to define every tendon. The body of someone who knew how to use force and was choosing, with visible effort, not to. Hensley smiled, patted Callan's cheek. Once, twice, the way you'd pat a dog. Good boy. He picked up the water bottle from the floor, unscrewed the cap, and poured it out on the linoleum. Slowly. Watching Callan watch the water spread across the tile. Then he set the empty bottle on the counter, tipped his chin at Darren, and walked out through the front door. The bell chimed behind him, cheerful, indifferent. Darren looked at the puddle on the floor, looked at Callan. "I'll get you another water," he said, quietly, almost apologetically. "Don't bother." Callan walked past the crushed peanuts and the puddle and pushed through the front door. Hensley's personal truck sat in the lot next door, engine running, waiting for him to drive past so the sheriff could follow at a distance that felt like surveillance. The cruiser that had been parked across the road fell in behind him 2 blocks later, followed for a quarter mile, then turned off. On the walk back, a man sitting on the bench outside the barber shop spit near Callan's boots. Not on them, near them. Close enough to be unmistakable, far enough to be deniable. A child on a bicycle pointed and whispered something to her mother. The mother pulled the child behind her, quick, instinctive, the way you'd pull a child away from a stray dog. Callan kept walking, spine straight, eyes forward. The bread and peanut butter from Mabel's store weighed almost nothing in the bag, but the walk home felt like carrying concrete. Day 4. A Thursday. Callan was rewiring a light fixture in his own trailer. Unpaid work, the kind you do when nobody's hiring you. When the knock came, 3 hard raps. Official rhythm. He opened the door. Deputy Corbin stood on the cinder block step, holding a clipboard. "Tiller Road Property Inspection." Corbin didn't wait to be invited. He pushed past Callan into the trailer, clipboard raised like a shield, pen already marking boxes. "Believe our county ordinance 14.2.6, unsafe electrical wiring, unlicensed business operation, failure to obtain county trade permit." Callan took the clipboard from the counter where Corbin had set it, read the citation line by line, while Corbin opened cabinets and peered under the sink. "This ordinance requires 72 hours written notice before any property inspection. You're here 4 hours after the complaint was allegedly filed." Callan flipped to the second page. "And section 14.2.6 applies to commercial properties. This is a residential rental. The applicable section would be 14.1.3, and that requires the property owner to be present during inspection, not the tenant." Corbin stopped, turned. "You a lawyer now?" "I can read." Callan set the clipboard down. The inspection order was signed by Judge Osgood at 7:14 this morning. The complaint was filed at 8:30, which means the order was signed an hour and 16 minutes before the complaint existed. Corbin's jaw shifted. The math wasn't complicated. The implication was, a judge signing an inspection order before the complaint it's based on has been filed is either extraordinary prescience or coordinated misconduct. "You want to be careful, Briggs." Corbin's voice dropped half a register. "Accusing a judge of anything is a real fast way to make your situation worse. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm reading timestamps." Corbin called it in on his radio. Jolene's voice crackled back, flat, unbothered. "Ordinance is valid. Judge Osgood signed the order this morning. Complaint is on file. Everything checks out." Of course it does, Callan thought, because by tomorrow, the filing time on that complaint would be changed to 7 a.m., and the timestamp discrepancy would vanish into Jolene Fry's clerical correction file, the same file that had swallowed a dozen other inconvenient details over the years. Corbin finished his inspection by citing the trailer for 3 code violations: exposed wiring in the bathroom, a wire Callan had been actively repairing when Corbin knocked; insufficient smoke detector coverage, the trailer had 2, code required 1, and operating a business from a residential address without a county trade license. The trade license was real. Callan had applied for it the week he arrived and received it by mail. He showed Corbin the document. Corbin looked at it. "This is expired. It's valid through December 31st. County clerk's office shows it as expired. You'll need to take that up with them." Callan looked at the license in his hand, looked at Corbin, understood with absolute clarity that Jolene Fry, county clerk, dispatcher, and gatekeeper, had changed the status in the system before Corbin knocked on his door. The license was valid. The system said it wasn't, and the system's word was law. "Sign here acknowledging receipt of the citations." Callan signed. Not because he agreed, because refusing to sign would give them cause for arrest. Obstruction, failure to comply, the creative menu of charges that small-town departments deploy when they need someone contained. Corbin left. Callan stood in his trailer surrounded by his own tools, holding a trade license that the county had retroactively invalidated, and did the math on how many more ways they could dismantle him before his trial date. This is how systems work. Not with one blow, but with 100 small cuts. If you think this man should fight back, wait until you see what they do next. Stay right here. Day 11. Municipal Court. The Bolivar County Municipal Courthouse occupied the second floor of a building that also housed the tax assessor's office and a room full of filing cabinets that smelled like mildew. Judge Theodore Osgood's courtroom was a repurposed conference room with wood grain laminate on the walls and an American flag that leaned slightly to the left in its stand. Osgood was 71, 30 years on the municipal bench. He wore wire-rimmed bifocals and a black robe that was slightly too large, as if he'd shrunk inside it over 3 decades. His reputation in Calvary Creek was simple. He kept order, he moved fast, and he didn't tolerate challenges to the way things had always been done. Callan appeared without counsel. He'd driven to the Greenville Legal Aid Office on day 6, 45 minutes each way, and found a waiting room with 30 people and a receptionist who told him the next available attorney had openings in October. "I'd like to request a continuance, Your Honor. I've been unable to obtain legal representation." Osgood peered over his bifocals. "Son, this is municipal court. Misdemeanor docket. Case is straightforward. Sheriff's testimony and the intake log are on file. We can get through this today. The charge carries up to 6 months incarceration under Mississippi Code 97-17-41. The Sixth Amendment guarantees my right to counsel in any proceeding where imprisonment is a potential outcome." The courtroom, a dozen plastic chairs occupied by 3 people waiting for traffic violations, went quiet. Jolene Fry, seated in the gallery as a potential witness, looked up from her phone. Osgood's expression tightened. Not anger, exactly. More like a man hearing a language he thought had been removed from the local vocabulary. "Continuance denied. You'll have your say. Proceed." Hensley testified first. He stood at the front of the room, there was no witness box, and read from a prepared statement. On August 11th, the defendant entered the Bolivar County Sheriff's Department at approximately 1:45 p.m. and presented a wallet belonging to Governor Mitchell Ware. "I personally counted the cash contents in the presence of my dispatcher and determined the total to be $512. The governor's office has not yet confirmed the original amount, but based on the discrepancy between the defendant's claim total and the actual total, I filed a complaint under Mississippi Code 97-17-41 for petty larceny in the amount of $305. Callan noted the key phrase, "The governor's office has not yet confirmed the original amount." Hensley was building his case on his own count, uncorroborated, unverified, contradicted only by the word of the man he'd arrested. When it was Callan's turn to cross-examine, pro se, standing in front of a folding table with no notes except his memory, he kept his questions short. "Sheriff, did you weigh or photograph the wallet's contents before counting?" "Didn't need to." "Was anyone else present during your count?" "Jolene was at the desk." "Did Ms. Fry directly observe the count? Was she standing beside you, watching each bill as you laid it on the counter?" Hensley hesitated. His eyes moved left, toward Jolene in the gallery, then back. "She was nearby." "Nearby. Not observing directly." "Objection," Hensley said, which was notable because Hensley was the witness, not the prosecutor. There was no prosecutor in the room. Municipal court in Bolivar County didn't bother with one for misdemeanors. The sheriff presented the case himself. Osgood didn't correct the procedural error. "Move on, Mr. Briggs." "One final question, Sheriff. You filed this complaint as the complainant, meaning you are both the victim of the alleged theft and the law enforcement officer who processed the arrest. Is that correct?" "The wallet was in my custody. That makes me the aggrieved party." "The wallet belongs to Governor Ware. It was in your custody because I handed it to you. You're simultaneously the evidence custodian, the complainant, and the arresting authority's superior officer. Has the governor himself filed any complaint?" Silence. Osgood leaned forward. "I said move on." "Your Honor, I'm establishing a conflict of interest that goes to the credibility of the court finds probable cause. Trial date is set for September 19th. Defendant is released on existing bond." Osgood's gavel came down with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence that didn't allow argument. Callan stood still for a moment. September 19th. 5 weeks away. In 5 weeks, the operation he'd spent 3 months building would either be complete or collapsed, and a trial in this courtroom, in front of this judge, based on this sheriff's testimony, would be the match that lit the fuse either way. He gathered the few documents Osgood's clerk had given him, a hearing summary, the trial date notice, the bond continuation form, and walked toward the exit. The narrow hallway outside the courtroom had no windows, just fluorescent tubes and wood grain laminate that made everything feel smaller than it already was. Hensley was waiting, leaning against the wall beside the stairwell door, arms folded, badge glinting under the fluorescent light. He'd changed into uniform since his testimony, a deliberate choice, because a uniform transforms a man into an institution, and institutions don't have to explain themselves. "Nice questions in there." Hensley didn't move from the wall. "Very professional. Almost like you've done it before. Callan tried to step past. Hensley's arm came out. Not a grab, just a forearm across the doorway, blocking passage like a turnstile. We're not done talking. The hearing is over, Sheriff. I have nothing to discuss with you outside a courtroom. Hensley's hand closed around Callan's forearm. Not a grip, a clamp. Fingers digging into muscle, thumb pressing the inside of the wrist against bone, the kind of hold that hurts without leaving marks in visible places. Listen carefully, because I'm only saying this once. Hensley's voice dropped to a register that didn't echo. You have no friends here, no lawyer, no money, no family within 500 miles. The entire town thinks you're a thief. A judge just denied you counsel. And in 5 weeks, I'm going to walk into that courtroom and tell 12 people exactly what happened, and they're going to believe me, because I'm the sheriff, and you're the outsider nobody invited. He released Callan's arm. The grip left white impressions in the skin that would darken to bruises by morning. 4 ovals, each the width of a finger, mapped like a constellation of control. Smart move would be to take the plea. Misdemeanor, time served, you go home, everyone forgets. Callan rubbed his wrist. Didn't look at it. Looked at Hensley. No. The word hung between them. Single syllable. No explanation, no negotiation. Just refusal, delivered with the flatness of someone who has calculated every possible outcome and chosen the one that costs the most. Hensley's jaw worked. He stepped aside. The stairwell door opened onto daylight, and Callan walked through it without looking back. Outside the courthouse, the sun hit his face like an accusation. He walked toward the Silverado, keys in hand, when a voice called from the shade of the building's lone tree. Mr. Briggs? Deacon Amos Sable stood with his hat in his hands, a man in his late 70s, thin as a fence post, wearing a shirt buttoned to the collar despite the heat. NAACP field representative for the Delta region for 31 years. He carried a leather satchel that looked older than most of the buildings in town. He didn't offer legal advice, didn't promise help, didn't say son or boy or any of the diminutives that Calvary Creek had been using on Callan since the day he arrived. Just, Mr. Briggs, and a nod that carried weight out of all proportion to the gesture, respect offered quietly, deliberately, as if the old man knew something that the rest of the town hadn't figured out. Callan nodded back. Deacon. Sable tipped his hat, turned, and walked toward a car that was older than the Silverado, but cleaner. He drove away without looking back. Callan stood in the parking lot, alone, and felt something he hadn't felt in 6 weeks. Seen. Day 8. 11:14. p.m. Headlights sweep across the trailer's thin curtains like searchlights. Callan is awake. He sleeps light, a habit from a previous life he doesn't talk about. And by the time the first car door opens, he's standing, fully dressed, hands visible at his sides, 2 cruisers. High beams flooding the front yard, turning the cinder block step and the dead grass into a stage. Sheriff Hensley steps out of the lead vehicle. Deputy Corbin from the second. A third deputy Callan hasn't seen before. Young, nervous, hand on his holster, like he's been told to expect trouble. The knock shakes the door in its frame. Search warrant! Open up, Briggs! Callan opens the door. Hensley fills the doorway, a folded document in his hand. Step outside. Callan steps onto the cinder block, takes the warrant, reads it in the cruiser headlights while Corbin and the third deputy push past him into the trailer. The warrant is issued by Judge Theodore Osgood. Case number 2-024-MC-0334. Authorized search of single-wide residence, Lot 7, Tiller Road, Calvary Creek. Items sought: currency, stolen property, firearms, ammunition, controlled substances. Firearms. The word sits in Callan's gut like ice. Not because he has weapons, he doesn't. Not in this trailer, not under this identity. But because the word's inclusion means someone is building towards something bigger than a $300 larceny charge. Firearms turn a misdemeanor into a felony. A felony turns a handyman into a prisoner. And a prisoner can't testify, can't investigate, can't do anything except sit in a cell, while the operation he's been feeding intelligence to for 11 weeks dies without him. Inside, Corbin and the young deputy are methodical. They flip the mattress, open every cabinet, dump the contents of drawers onto the floor. The young deputy finds the toolbox under the bed and pulls it out. Callan watches through the doorway, hands still visible, pulse controlled. The toolbox, the false bottom. 11 weeks of field notes, the encrypted phone, the laminated card with his real name and a badge number that would end this entire charade in seconds. The young deputy shakes the toolbox, hefts it. The false bottom holds The release mechanism requires pressure on two specific points simultaneously, a design feature built for exactly this scenario. He opens the top compartment. Wrenches, screwdrivers, a voltage tester. Tools. Just tools. He sets the toolbox aside, moves on. Callan exhales. Hensley is standing beside his cruiser, watching the trailer, arms folded. He glances at Callan. Smiles. The kind of smile that's a weapon, not an expression. Then he opens his cruiser's trunk. The trunk light illuminates a paper bag. Brown. Folded at the top. Hensley picks it up, tucks it under his arm, and walks toward the trailer with the casual stride of a man picking up groceries. He doesn't look at Callan as he passes. Doesn't need to. The message is in the motion. Callan watches through the reflection in the trailer's window, the one angled just enough to show the kitchen area without requiring him to turn his head. He sees Hensley enter, sees him move to the kitchen sink, sees him slide the paper bag behind the cleaning supplies under the counter, the same area the deputies already searched and cleared 2 minutes ago. His hands stay at his sides. His breathing doesn't change. Every muscle in his body understands what's happening with the kind of crystalline clarity that makes the next 10 minutes feel like they're happening underwater. Corbin! Hensley's voice comes from inside the trailer, loud enough to carry. Check under that kitchen sink again. Thoroughly this time. Corbin walks to the sink, kneels, reaches behind the bleach and dish soap. Well, look at that. He emerges holding a .38 revolver. Snub-nosed, blued steel. Serial number visible on the barrel, a number that will match a weapon reported stolen in a burglary 3 counties over. A weapon that did not exist in this trailer 4 minutes ago. Hensley steps outside. He's bigger than Callan by 50 pounds and 4 inches, and he uses every pound and inch of it now, stepping close enough that Callan can smell the coffee on his breath. Well, well, the smile is back. Thief and armed. Mississippi Code 97-37-35, receiving a stolen firearm. That weapon was not in this residence when you arrived. Callan's voice is flat, controlled. The voice of a man who has been trained not to escalate, not to accuse, not to give them anything they can use, even when every nerve is screaming. And you know it. Hensley leans in. His chest makes contact with Callan's, a shove disguised as proximity, the kind of physical assertion that lives in the gray zone between intimidation and assault. You're going to want to be real careful with your next words, boy. Callan doesn't move, doesn't step back, doesn't raise his hands. His shoulders absorb the pressure the way walls absorb weather. Passive, structural, built to endure. He could respond. His body knows how. Muscle memory stored in fibers that have been trained for close-quarters situations that make a Mississippi sheriff's chest bump feel like a handshake. But he doesn't. Hensley's hand comes up. Not a punch. A shove. Open-palmed to the center of Callan's chest. Callan's back hits the trailer's doorframe. The metal edge catches his shoulder blade, sends a bright shock of pain down his arm. He catches his balance on the cinder block step, feet finding purchase with reflexes that are faster and more precise than a handyman's should be. Resisting, Hensley says to Corbin. I haven't moved. You were aggressive. Deputy, did you observe the suspect being aggressive? Corbin looks at Hensley, looks at Callan, looks at the young deputy, who is standing 3 feet away with his hand on his holster and his mouth slightly open. Suspect was non-compliant, Corbin says. The words come out rehearsed, coordinated. Hensley grabs Callan's arm, spins him around, and pushes him face first against the trailer wall. Zip ties this time, pulled tight enough that the plastic digs channels into the skin. Callan's cheek presses against aluminum siding that still holds the day's heat. He tastes dust and metal. You got a choice, Briggs. Cooperate, and this stays a property charge. Fight, and I add assault on a law enforcement officer. Your pick. I haven't fought. I haven't resisted. I haven't moved. You're manufacturing charges in real time, and there are witnesses. Witnesses! Hensley looks around the dark street. The young deputy, Corbin, no cameras, no civilians, just empty houses and Delta darkness. Who's watching, Briggs? Nobody's watching. Across the road, Miss Odette Gaskin's porch light clicks on. She stands in her doorway with her phone in her hand, screen glowing, held at an angle that points directly at the scene unfolding on Tiller Road. She doesn't speak, doesn't call out, just holds the phone steady with both hands, the way someone holds a camera when every second of footage matters. 2 minutes and 18 seconds. That's how long she records before Hensley's cruiser pulls away with Callan in the back seat. Long enough to capture Hensley walking to his trunk, long enough to see the paper bag, long enough to document the return trip into the trailer and the discovery that followed. She doesn't know it yet, but in 14 days, that 2 minutes and 18 seconds will be the difference between a man's conviction and a sheriff's reckoning. Callan is booked for the second time in 8 days. The charge sheet adds, possession of a stolen firearm, Mississippi Code annotated Section 97-37-35. Bond set at $25,000. The booking process is rougher this time. Corbin handles fingerprinting with the kind of deliberate pressure that turns a routine procedure into a message, pushing Callan's fingers flat against the scanner hard enough to bend the joints backward, holding each one a beat longer than necessary. "Spread your fingers!" Callan spreads them. Corbin grabs the ring finger and presses it down at an angle that makes the knuckle pop. Not enough to injure. Enough to remind Callan who's holding his hand. The photograph station is a wall with height markers and a fluorescent bar that turns every face the same shade of gray. The young deputy, the one from the search, the one whose name Callan still doesn't know, takes the photo. Before the shutter clicks, Corbin reaches over and yanks the collar of Callan's shirt down, exposing the bruise on his shoulder from Hensley's shove. "Want that documented, don't we?" Corbin says. "Show the judge what happens when suspects resist." The photo captures a man with a torn collar, a bruise blooming purple across his right shoulder, and eyes that hold something Corbin mistakes for submission. It isn't. It's inventory. Callan is memorizing every face, every badge number, every procedural shortcut. The way a camera records footage, indiscriminate, complete, stored for later review. 25,000 for a first offense. No prior record, no flight risk. In a county where the median bond for felony weapon possession is 5,000. Miss Odette's coffee can doesn't hold $25,000. Nobody on Tiller Road holds $25,000. The cell door closes. The fluorescent light resumes its buzz. Callan sits on the same metal bench he occupied 6 days ago, in the same 6x8 room, under the same light that vibrates at a frequency calibrated to erode sanity 1 hour at a time. He folds his hands, closes his eyes, and begins to count. Not sheep, not breaths, but receipts. Every timestamp, every badge number, every lie that was told in the wrong order. A ledger of misconduct stored in the one place they can't search, his memory. They think they've buried him. They think a planted gun and a fabricated theft and a $25,000 bond and a town that won't look at him are enough to make a man disappear into the system. They don't know who they're burying. Not yet. Day 9. The holding cell. Terrence Wardle occupies the adjacent cell, DUI, third offense, waiting for a transfer to the county facility in Cleveland. He's 46, talkative, and visibly confused by the man sharing his accommodations. "You just sit there." Terrence leans against the bars separating their cells. "They planted a gun on you, man. I heard Corbin talking about it at the desk, like it was a fishing story, and you're sitting there like you're waiting for a bus." Panicking doesn't help the situation. Callan doesn't open his eyes. "Help the... brother?" Panic is the appropriate response. Appropriate. Terrence gestures at the cell, at the walls, at the fluorescent light that has become a shared enemy. A normal human being would be losing his mind right now. "I'm working on something." "Working on what? You're in a box." Callan opens one eye. "Trust me." Something in the way he says it. Not pleading, not desperate, but certain in a way that doesn't belong in a holding cell, makes Terrence stop talking. He studies Callan for a long moment, then he nods slowly. All right. I don't know what your deal is, man, but you're either the calmest innocent person I've ever met, or you know something they don't." Callan closes his eye, doesn't answer, resumes counting. What he doesn't say, he has been in worse holding facilities, in rooms where the walls were closer and the questions came with voltage and sleep deprivation and consequences that made a Mississippi County jail feel like a hotel lobby. He learned to breathe through confinement the way divers learn to breathe through depth, not by fighting the pressure, but by adapting to it, by understanding that panic is a luxury he was trained to abandon a long time ago, in a place very far from here. Deacon Amos Sable arrived at the jail at 10:42 a.m., wearing the same button collar he'd worn at the courthouse. He signed in as a community advocate, not counsel, not clergy, just an interested party exercising his right to visit a detained individual during posted hours. Jolene Fry looked at his signature, looked at his NAACP credentials, made a phone call that lasted 11 seconds before waving him through. Sable sat across from Callan in the visitation area, a plastic table in a room the size of a closet, monitored by a camera with a red blinking light. Miss Odette asked me to come? Sable set his satchel on the table. She's been making calls to the NAACP state office, to the Attorney General's complaint line, to anyone she thinks might listen. Callan nodded. That's kind of her. It's more than kind, it's strategic. Sable's eyes were sharp behind his bifocals, the eyes of a man who'd been navigating Mississippi power structures since before Callan was born. She has a video, Mr. Briggs, from last night, 2 minutes, 18 seconds. Shows Sheriff Hensley walking to his cruiser during the search, removing an object and re-entering your residence, and then Deputy Corbin finding a firearm in a location that had already been searched. Callan's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted, a recalculation, fast and silent. The video was useful, enormously useful. It was also a complication, evidence that accelerated timelines he wasn't ready to accelerate. I've sent a copy to the NAACP state office, and I've asked Faye Chilton at the Attorney General's office to take a look. Ms. Chilton handles civil rights complaints in the Delta region. She's fair, she's thorough, and she doesn't answer to Sheriff Hensley. Callan processed this. Faye Chilton, a G office. A parallel investigation he hadn't known about, or rather, hadn't confirmed. If the AG was already receiving complaints about Bolivar County, his own operation wasn't the only iron in the fire. Multiple lines converging on the same target. That changed the calculus. Deacon, Callan leaned forward slightly. Did you send the video through an encrypted channel or standard email? Sable blinked. The question wasn't what he expected. An innocent man accused of theft would ask about bail money, about lawyers, about when he could go home. Not about encryption. Email, why? No reason, just careful. Callan leaned back. Let the answer sit. Change the subject. What's the mood in town? Sable didn't press, but something in his posture shifted. The subtle adjustment of a man filing information for later review. Quiet. Scared. Patrice has the co-op locked down. Nobody wants to be seen helping you. But they're watching. People always watch when they can't act. That's enough. Sometimes watching is enough. Sable studied him for a long moment. Then he reached into his satchel, pulled out a small bag of trail mix and a bottle of water, and set them on the table. You take care of yourself, Mr. Briggs. There it was again. Mr. Briggs, spoken with the same gravity as at the courthouse. Not son, not boy. Not the casual diminishment that Calvary Creek deployed against outsiders and black men alike. Just his name, carried with respect that felt deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if the old man understood that names were shields, and some people deserved to wear theirs. Sable left. Callan ate the trail mix, drank the water, stared at the ceiling. The camera in the corner blinked its red eye. Recording everything. Preserving everything, including the 11-second phone call Jolene had made when Sable signed in, the one that went to Hensley's personal cell, alerting him that the NAACP was now involved. The machine had received its first outside inquiry, and like all machines built on secrecy, it began to rattle. The body cam footage was the first receipt, not because anyone reviewed it voluntarily, because Faye Chilton's office sent a records request within 48 hours of receiving Miss Odette's video, citing Mississippi Public Records Act authority, and the request specifically named Deputy Corbin's body cam footage from August 11th. The footage ran 11 minutes and 42 seconds. Timestamp 14:37, 2:27 p.m. Civil Time. It showed Corbin arriving at Miss Odette's house, approaching the Silverado, ordering Callan to step away, reading the complaint from his notepad, and executing the arrest. Standard, procedural, clean on its surface, except for one detail. The body cam timestamp reads 14:37. Corbin was already on scene, already issuing orders, already reaching for handcuffs. At 2:27 p.m., the dispatch log, filed by Jolene Fry, lists the complaint entry time as 14:45, 2:45 p.m. Corbin arrived at the scene 18 minutes before the complaint was officially logged. Chilton's investigator noted the discrepancy in a preliminary memo. The memo was filed internally. It hadn't reached Calvary Creek, but it existed, a small crack in a wall that Hensley's department had spent years maintaining. The second receipt was quieter. Jolene Fry's dispatch log for August 11th contained an amendment, entry 7419. Original timestamp 14:09, 2:09 p.m. Amended timestamp 14:15. Amendment authorized by J. Fry, dispatch supervisor. Reason for amendment: clerical correction. A 6-minute adjustment, minor on its face. But the original timestamp, 1409, placed the complaint entry even earlier than the body cam arrival, suggesting the dispatch was logged at 2:09, Corbin arrived at 2:27, and then Jolene changed the complaint time to 2:15 to narrow the gap and make the sequence appear less coordinated. She'd made a mistake in the adjustment. She'd moved the time forward when she should have moved it back, or left it alone entirely. A small error, the kind that happens when you're editing records in a hurry, under pressure, trying to clean up a timeline that wasn't supposed to be examined. The county's backup server, an automatic archiving system that cached every digital entry every 60 seconds and could not be manually edited, preserved the original timestamp. Entry 7419, original 1409, immutable, permanent, waiting for someone to compare it against the amended version. And the third receipt, the one that would eventually blow the case open, was the one nobody had requested yet. The governor's property loss report, filed August 12th with the Office of the Governor, State of Mississippi. Item: brown leather wallet. Contents as reported by Governor Mitchell Ware. Cash, $817. Credit cards, 3. Driver's license. Official correspondence, 1 document, classification noted. $817. The exact number Callan stated. The exact number Hensley disputed. The exact amount that proved the $305 wasn't missing. It was pocketed. The report sat in a state government filing system, processed by a clerk, stamped with a date, assigned a reference number. It hadn't been cross-referenced with the Bolivar County arrest report. It hadn't been flagged. It hadn't been sent to Hensley or Osgood or anyone in Calvary Creek. It just existed, quietly, in the bureaucratic background noise of state government, a receipt waiting for someone to read it. And somewhere between that filing and the Attorney General's office, the two streams of information were about to converge. Miss Odette's video traveling one direction, the governor's property report traveling another, both heading toward the same destination. The desk of a woman named Faye Chilton, who had been investigating complaints about Bolivar County law enforcement for 8 months and had just received the most compelling evidence she'd seen in the entire inquiry. The machine didn't know it yet, but the rattling was getting louder. Day 12. A phone rang in the Bolivar County Sheriff's Department at 8:17 a.m. Jolene answered with her standard greeting. Bolivar County Attorney General's Office. This is Investigator Faye Chilton. I need to request the complete booking record, incident reports, and body cam footage related to the arrest of Callan Briggs on August 11th and August 19th. Case numbers 202-4-BV-0811 and 202-4-MC-0334. Jolene's hand tightened on the receiver. Those records would need to go through our records department. Processing time is 3 to 5 business days. Ms. Fry, this is an official AG inquiry. I can have a subpoena signed by noon if the records aren't transmitted by end of business today. Your call. A pause. Then, I'll see what I can do. Thank you. The line disconnected. Jolene sat motionless for 4 seconds. Then she picked up her personal cell phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. Wade, the AG's office just called. They want everything. Booking records, body cam, incident reports, both arrests. The silence on the other end lasted long enough for the AC to cycle twice. Who? Faye Chilton, investigator. More silence. Stall her. She threatened a subpoena by noon, Wade. Then give her the intake forms, just the intake forms. Say the body cam server is being serviced. Buy me 48 hours. And if she comes back with a court order, then we'll deal with it. But right now, I need 48 hours. He hung up. Jolene stared at her phone. Then she began typing, fingers moving across the keyboard with the practiced speed of a woman who'd been editing records for longer than most people in town had been alive. Entry 7419 received its third amendment that morning. Reason for amendment: system error correction. The backup server, indifferent and tireless, cached the change at 8:23 a.m. Original, First Amendment, Second Amendment, all preserved, stacked like geological layers, each one telling a slightly different story about the same 6 minutes. If this man gets justice, it won't come from this county. It'll come from the people who see what this system is doing and refuse to look away. If that's you, subscribe and share this story, because the truth is about to get a whole lot harder to bury. That same evening, the young deputy, Travis Mackey, 24, 6 months out of the academy, sat in his cruiser in the Walmart parking lot in Cleveland, 30 miles from Calvary Creek, staring at a chicken sandwich he couldn't eat. He'd watched Hensley carry a paper bag into the trailer. He'd watched Corbin find a revolver in a cabinet that Travis himself had searched 90 seconds earlier. He'd said nothing. He'd signed the supplemental report. He'd initialed the evidence log. and now his signature was on a document that described events he knew hadn't happened. His phone sat on the passenger seat. He'd typed the number for the Mississippi Attorney General's tip line 3 times and deleted it 3 times. Each time his thumb hovered over the call button, he saw Hensley's face. Not angry, not threatening, just calm. The calm of a man who expected loyalty the way he expected gravity, as natural as weight. Travis bit into the sandwich, chewed without tasting. Thought about his mother, who'd cried when he graduated the academy, about the mortgage he'd just signed on a house in Rosedale, about the pension that started vesting at year 5. He put the phone in the glove box, finished the sandwich, drove back to Calvary Creek, but he didn't sleep that night, and the evidence log, with his initials next to a firearm he'd watched being planted, sat in a filing cabinet at the sheriff's department, waiting. Day 13. And then, the thing that Wade Hensley hadn't planned for. Governor Mitchell Ware's chief of staff placed a call to the Beaver County Sheriff's Department at 4:12 p.m. on day 13. The governor would like to personally thank the individual who returned his wallet, a young man named Callan Briggs. We understand he resides in Calvary Creek. Governor Ware will be in the Delta region on August 26th and would like to stop by. Please coordinate with Mr. Briggs to confirm availability. Jolene put the call on hold, walked to Hensley's office, closed the door. Wade. What? The governor's office just called. He wants to come here, to thank Briggs, in person. August 26th. Hensley set his coffee down. The color left his face in stages, forehead first, then cheeks, then the heavy jaw that had been clenched since Faye Chilton's call the day before. Tell them he's unavailable, out of town, moved away, anything. His advance team already confirmed the visit, Wade. They'll be here at 10 a.m. 3 vehicles, highway patrol escort. There's no telling them no. Hensley stood, walked to his window, stared out at the parking lot where, 12 days ago, a man had knelt in zip ties on hot asphalt while a crate was loaded into an unmarked sedan. The governor of Mississippi was coming to Calvary Creek to thank the man Hensley had arrested for stealing from the governor's own wallet, the man currently sitting in Hensley's own jail on a $25,000 bond. He picked up the phone, dialed Judge Osgood. "Theo, we have a problem," he explained. Osgood listened. The silence that followed was the silence of 2 men calculating exposure. "Reduce the bond," Osgood said. "Get him out tonight, before the governor's people arrive." "I set that bond at 25 for a reason. And now the reason is sitting in the governor's schedule. If Mitchell Ware shows up and finds his wallet hero locked up on charges you filed, this isn't a county problem anymore. This is a state problem. Reduce it to 5,000. Get him released. And Wade..." Osgood's voice carried the particular exhaustion of a man who has been managing other people's messes for 30 years. "Make sure he keeps his mouth shut." Hensley hung up, sat in his office. The coffee had gone cold. The parking lot was empty, except for the cruisers and the afternoon shadows lengthening across asphalt that still held the ghost of a man's body pressed against it. He picked up the phone again. Called the jail. "Process Briggs for release. Bond reduced to 5,000. Make it happen before midnight." Miss Odette answered her phone on the second ring. Drove to the bail bondsman in Cleveland. Posted the $500, 10%, and drove back to Calvary Creek with a receipt that smelled like a copy machine and a prayer that she'd never have to use her water heater money again. Callan walked out of the Beaver County Jail at 9:17 p.m., August 24th, 14 days after he'd returned a wallet, 12 days after he'd been arrested for doing it, 8 days after a gun was planted in his trailer, wearing the same clothes he'd been booked in, carrying a plastic bag of personal effects, and bearing a bruise on his right shoulder that had turned from purple to green to yellow, and settled into a shade that would take another 2 weeks to disappear completely. Miss Odette drove him home. Neither of them spoke. The Buick's headlights cut through Delta darkness. Cricket song came through the open windows. At the trailer, she put the car in park. "Whatever's coming," she said, not looking at him, looking at the road ahead. "You make sure it comes for the right people." Callan looked at her, looked at the trailer. Door still ajar from the search, interior still trashed, his life still scattered across the floor. "Yes, ma'am." She drove away. The taillights shrank to red dots and then to nothing. Callan stood in the dark, alone, bruised, broke, holding a plastic bag that contained everything the Beaver County Sheriff's Department thought he was worth. He went inside. The trailer was a crime scene of indifference. Mattress on the floor, cabinet doors hanging open, drawers upended, his clothes piled in the corner like rags. The kitchen sink dripped. The AC had been left off for 8 days, and the interior smelled like stale heat and something chemical from the cleaning supplies Corbin had scattered across the linoleum. He righted a chair, sat down, looked at the floor where the toolbox had been dragged out during the search. It was back under the bed. They'd shoved it there, careless, not even bothering to close the top compartment. He pulled it out, opened the false bottom. Everything was there. The encrypted phone, the field journal, the micro recorder, the laminated card. He picked up the phone, dialed the number he'd dialed 46 times in the last 7 weeks. 1 ring, 2 rings. Briggs. The voice was female, clipped, professional, and carried the particular urgency of someone who has been looking for you. Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you on backup channels for 36 hours. I've been in county lockup, Lorraine. 14 days, no phone access. The silence on the other end wasn't confusion. It was the silence of someone rapidly recalculating a dozen operational variables. What happened? The short version: I returned the governor's wallet to the sheriff. Hensley pocketed $305 and charged me with larceny. When that wasn't enough, they planted a stolen firearm in my trailer and added a felony. I'm out on bond, and the governor of Mississippi is arriving in Calvary Creek in approximately 36 hours to shake my hand. Another silence, longer this time. The governor? His wallet, his visit, his schedule. And my cover is sitting on a knife's edge because Hensley is going to do everything in his power to keep Ware away from me before that meeting happens. Stay where you are. I'm driving down tonight. We need to get ahead of this. Lorraine, they don't know who I am. But they're digging. The AG's office is already pulling records. If Chilton's investigation and our operation collide without coordination, we lose 3 months of casework. I know. I'll be there by morning. Do not identify yourself to anyone. Not the AG, not the governor's staff, not anyone. I'll bring authorization from Washington if I have to wake up the assistant director. The line went dead. Callan set the phone down. For the first time in 46 days, someone on the other end had answered. He sat in the dark. The AC hummed back to life. He'd flipped the switch on his way in, and now it rattled and coughed and began pushing cool air across the wreckage of his temporary life, and waited for the morning that was about to change everything. Not because the governor was coming, because 47 straw purchases, 2 confirmed FFLs, 9 transport runs, and 3 months of undercover surveillance were about to collide with a sheriff who thought he was dealing with a handyman, and a town that was about to learn what happens when you bury the wrong man. End of Part 1. Part 2 picks up at 5 a.m. on August 26th, the morning the governor of Mississippi knocks on a trailer door in Calvary Creek and finds the man he came to thank covered in bruises, surrounded by wreckage, and carrying a badge that no one in Bolivar County knew existed. What happens next will dismantle everything this town thought it knew. Don't miss it. 4:47 a.m., August 25th. A pair of headlights crept down Tiller Road at the speed of someone reading lot numbers in the dark. Callan watched from the kitchen window. The car was a government-issue sedan, dark blue, no markings, the kind of vehicle that blended into federal parking garages and stood out everywhere else. It stopped 20 yards from the trailer, engine off, headlights off. Door opened. Lorraine Purcell walked through the dead grass with a laptop bag slung over one shoulder and a sealed manila envelope under her arm. She was 51, compact, iron-haired, and moved with the purposeful stride of a woman who had driven 400 miles through the night without stopping for anything except gas. She'd been with ATF for 23 years, field operations, not a desk. Her knuckles carried scars from a warehouse breach in '09 that most people in the Bureau had only read about in after-action reports. Callan opened the door before she knocked. Lorraine stepped inside, looked at the trailer, the overturned furniture still scattered from the search, the mattress still on the floor, the cabinet contents heaped in piles. She didn't ask about it. She'd read the situation in the 2 seconds it took to cross the threshold. Sit down. Talk me through everything. From the wallet. Callan sat. He started from August 11th and didn't leave anything out. The wallet, Hensley's count, the arrest, Corbin's body cam, Miss Odette's bond, Patrice Ewing's economic freeze, the code enforcement citation, Osgood's courtroom, the search warrant, the planted .38, the second arrest, the $25,000 bond, Jolene's dispatch log amendments, Faye Chilton's AG inquiry, Deacon Sable's NAACP involvement, and the governor's scheduled visit. He spoke for 14 minutes, no notes, dates, times, badge numbers, statute citations, all from memory, delivered in the flat cadence of a field report. When he finished, Lorraine hadn't moved. Her pen was still capped in her hand. How much of your cover is intact? Functionally none. They don't know I'm federal, but they know I'm not a handyman. The questions in court, the way I read the warrant, the encrypted channel question to Sable, I slipped. Not enough for them to identify me, enough for them to know something doesn't add up. The toolbox, intact. They missed the false bottom during the search. Phone, journal, recorder, credentials, all secure. Lorraine opened her laptop, pulled up a secure portal, typed for 90 seconds, reading something Callan couldn't see from across the table. Washington flagged the governor's property report 3 days ago when it cross-referenced with a Bolivar County arrest record in the DOJ database. That's how I found you. Not through our channels, through a data match. Your name showed up in a state arrest file linked to a wallet belonging to a sitting governor, and an analyst in the firearms trafficking task force put 2 and 2 together. She looked up. You've been operating without handler contact for 46 days. That's a critical protocol violation. On our end, not yours. The rotation failure is being reviewed. But right now, the priority is this. The governor arrives in 29 hours. The AG's office is pulling records that will intersect with our case file, and Hensley is cornered. Cornered people do dangerous things. What's the authorization status? Lorraine opened the manila envelope. Inside, a single document, heavy bond paper, ATF letterhead, case file number across the top. Emergency declassification, signed by the Assistant Director of Field Operations at 11:47 p.m. last night. Your undercover status in Bolivar County is officially terminated for purposes of self-defense, civil rights preservation, and coordination with the governor's office. Operation Ironweed continues under a different operative. They're reassigning from the Memphis field office. Callan took the document, read it line by line. His eyes stopped on one phrase. Full operational support authorized. That means when the governor knocks on your door tomorrow, we're not hiding anymore. That means your credentials are live. That means every charge Hensley filed is about to be evaluated in the context of a federal agent performing undercover duties in a jurisdiction under active federal investigation. Lorraine closed the laptop. And that means Hensley, Corbin, Osgood, Fry, every single person who touched your case is now potentially subject to 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. Against a federal officer. Callan set the document down, stared at it. 3 months of living in a trailer, eating oatmeal, fixing porches, being pulled over and passed over and spit at, and arrested and shoved and framed. 3 months of silence when every instinct demanded speech. 3 months of the hardest kind of discipline. The kind that requires you to be less than you are, to absorb indignity without flinching, to let people believe you are small so that the work can be large. What about the case? The straw purchases, the FFLs. 47 documented transactions, 2 FFL holders cooperating as of last week. They flipped when Memphis served the initial warrants. The third FFL is still unidentified. 9 transport runs logged with GPS and photographic evidence. Corbin is on camera at 3 of them. Hensley's department vehicles were used for at least 4. And the crate you saw being loaded during your arrest, the plate you memorized, Bravo Victor 7311, registered to a shell company called Delta Agricultural Supply, LLC. That company leases warehouse space from Ewing Properties. Callan's jaw tightened. Patrice, we don't have her directly, not yet. Leasing warehouse space to a shell company isn't a crime unless she knew what was being stored there. But the financial thread is being pulled. And the .38 they planted? Lorraine's expression hardened. The serial number matches a weapon stolen in a residential burglary in Sunflower County, reported June 14th. How it got from a burglary to your kitchen sink is going to be a very interesting question for Hensley's defense attorney. They sat in the wrecked trailer, surrounded by evidence of a search designed to destroy a man, and planned the next 30 hours with the precision of 2 people who'd been doing this long enough to know that justice was a construction project, built one documented fact at a time, with no room for emotion and less room for error. At 6:15 a.m., Lorraine drove to Cleveland to check into a motel and begin coordinating with the AG's office. Before she left, she handed Callan a fresh encrypted phone and a small cloth bag. Inside the bag, his ATF badge, gold shield, the eagle and the crossed pistols. He held it in his palm for a long time, feeling the weight of it. Not physical weight, which was negligible, but the weight of what it represented. Authority, accountability. The right to stand in a room full of people who had spent 2 weeks trying to break him and say, "You chose wrong." He put the badge back in the bag, closed the drawstring, set it beside the authorization memo on the kitchen counter. Not yet. Tomorrow. Across town, Wade Hensley's night was not going well. He'd received 5 phone calls since the governor's advance team confirmed the visit. The first was from Jolene, informing him of the schedule. The second was from Judge Osgood, advising the bond reduction. The third, fourth, and fifth were from people he'd spent 20 years keeping in line, all asking the same question in different words. What did you do? Patrice Ewing's call came at 9:14 p.m., and it was the only one that made his hands shake. The governor of Mississippi is coming to my town to congratulate the man you arrested. Patrice's voice held the controlled fury of someone accustomed to running the machine, not watching it malfunction. Explain to me how this happens. I'm handling it. You're handling it. The way you handled the wallet? The way you handled the search? Wade, I have federal auditors looking at warehouse leases because your operation left a paper trail that a blind man could follow. You told me the pipeline was clean. The pipeline is clean. Then why is Faye Chilton pulling records from your department? Why is the NAACP involved? Why is a 90,000-follower news account sharing a video of you planting evidence in a man's home? Hensley's stomach dropped. What video? The old woman across the road. Odette Gaskin. She recorded your search. 2 minutes and change. It's online. Not viral yet, but it's out there. And if the governor's staff finds it before tomorrow morning, you won't need to worry about the AG. You'll need to worry about federal marshals. Hensley sat in his office after midnight, lights off, staring at his phone screen. The video had 1,800 views. It showed exactly what Patrice described. A man in a sheriff's uniform walking to his cruiser, opening the trunk, removing a paper bag, entering a trailer, and 90 seconds later, a deputy emerging with a firearm. The quality was poor. The lighting was bad, but the sequence was unmistakable. He called Corbin. We need to get our story straight before the governor arrives. Nah, Wade, my story is straight. I found a weapon during a lawful search. That's what my report says. And the video? A pause. What video? Hensley sent the link. The silence that followed lasted 22 seconds. The lighting is bad. You can't identify anyone clearly. It could be, it's me, Nash. It's clearly me. I'm in uniform. Then we say the bag contained evidence collection materials. Gloves, bags, standard equipment for a search operation. And the .38 was found during a lawful search of the premises. The video doesn't show the interior. It doesn't show me finding the weapon. It shows you carrying a bag. That's circumstantial. Hensley rubbed his face with both hands. Coordinated stories, plausible deniability. The mechanics of institutional self-protection. The same mechanics he'd deployed a dozen times over 20 years. Every time a complaint was filed. Every time a camera caught something inconvenient. Every time the truth needed reshaping to fit the narrative that kept them all employed and powerful and untouchable. But tomorrow was different. Tomorrow the governor of Mississippi was parking in his jurisdiction. Tomorrow the AG was pulling his records. Tomorrow, a man he'd arrested, shoved, framed, and jailed was going to be standing in broad daylight when the most powerful person in the state shook his hand. And Hensley had no idea, none, what Callan Briggs actually was. Only that the handyman on Tiller Road knew things he shouldn't know, spoke with precision he shouldn't have, and carried himself with the stillness of someone who was waiting. Not hiding, not afraid. Waiting. The alarm on Hensley's phone was set for 5 a.m. He didn't sleep, neither did Callan. At 11:46 p.m., headlights swept across the trailer. Not the measured approach of Lorraine's sedan. A truck, heavy diesel, pulling to a stop on the shoulder across from his lot, with the engine idling and the high beams aimed directly at his front window. The light flooded the trailer's interior, turning every surface white and harsh. Callan moved to the side of the window, looked through the gap between curtain and frame. A Bolivar County Sheriff's Department pickup, the kind used for off-road patrols, brush guard mounted, light bar on the roof. Not Hensley's vehicle, not Corbin's cruiser. The third deputy, the young one from the search, whose name Callan had never caught, whose face had been half open with confusion the night of the planted .38. The deputy stepped out, walked to the edge of Callan's lot, didn't cross onto the property. That would constitute another contact, another potential violation. He just stood there, hands on his belt, staring at the trailer with the high beams behind him, turning his silhouette into a black cutout against white light. 2 minutes, 3, 5, standing without moving, without speaking, the engine rumbling, the high beams burning. A performance of surveillance designed to communicate a single message. We know where you sleep. Callan watched from the window, counted seconds, cataloged the behavior. Intimidation by presence, no verbal contact, no physical approach, Technically lawful, but unmistakably threatening. The kind of tactic he'd seen deployed in 3 different states against 3 different targets by people who understood that fear didn't require words. Sometimes all it required was light and silence and the patience to let the target's imagination do the work. At 11:53, the deputy's radio crackled. He lifted it to his ear, listened, nodded once, to no one, a reflex, and walked back to the truck. The high beams swept across the trailer one final time as the truck reversed, turned, and rumbled back toward Route 8. Callan exhaled. His hand went to the cloth bag on the counter, the one containing his badge, the gold shield, the eagle, and crossed pistols. He gripped it through the fabric the way soldiers grip talismans before deployments. Not superstition, grounding. A reminder of who he was when everything around him insisted he was someone else. He set the bag down, checked the locks, checked the windows, pulled the false-bottom toolbox from under the bed, and confirmed its contents one last time. Encrypted phone, journal, micro-recorder, laminated credentials card. All present, all intact. Then he lay on sheets pulled tight enough to bounce a coin, staring at the ceiling, and waited for dawn the way he'd waited for extraction in places where the stakes were higher and the darkness was deeper, with his eyes open and his breathing controlled and his mind running scenarios until the first light cracked the eastern horizon and the last night of his cover ended. August 26th dawned clear and hot. By 7 a.m., the temperature was already 84 degrees and climbing. The air smelled like cotton fields and diesel from the grain elevator, and the sky was the flat, unbroken blue that the Delta wears when it wants you to know there's nowhere to hide. Word of the governor's visit had filtered through every information network in Calvary Creek overnight. Not through official channels, through the same phone chains and porch conversations and plant break room whispers that had carried news of Callan's arrest 2 weeks earlier. Except this time, the information moved with a different energy. Not judgment, curiosity. The town that had crossed the street to avoid him was now watching from windows and doorways, trying to understand why the most powerful person in the state was driving 4 hours to shake the hand of a man they'd been told was a thief. Miss Odette called 3 neighbors, told them to dress decent and stand on their porches at 10 a.m., because history was about to drive down Tiller Road, and they could either witness it or hear about it secondhand. At the Bolivar County Sheriff's Department, Hensley arrived at 6 and changed into his dress uniform, the one with the service bars and the polished badge and the creased trousers that made authority look like something you could press and fold. He stood in front of his office mirror and practiced the expression he planned to wear when the motorcade arrived: concerned citizen, cooperative official, servant of the people. He didn't know that Lorraine Purcell was already in town, didn't know about the ATF agents in the black SUV parked behind the diner, didn't know about the sealed evidence case or the declassification memo, or the phone call Faye Chilton had made to the AG at 6:15 a.m., confirming that all documentary evidence was compiled and authenticated. He thought he was managing a public relations problem. He didn't know he was walking into a reckoning. Lorraine Purcell arrived at Callan's trailer in the government sedan, accompanied by a second vehicle, a black SUV with tinted windows and federal plates. Inside the SUV, 2 ATF field agents from the Memphis office, a digital forensics technician, and a locked case containing copies of the Operation Ironweed evidence file. Callan had spent the morning putting the trailer back together. Not because it mattered, he'd never live here again, but because discipline was the only language his body understood, and the act of righting overturned furniture, refolding scattered clothing, and sweeping broken glass was a form of control over the one space they'd tried to take from him. Lorraine handed him a clean shirt, dark blue, professional, not a uniform. A TF undercover agents didn't wear uniforms for reveal operations, but the shirt was pressed, fitted, and carried the implicit message that the man wearing it had somewhere important to be. Governor's motorcade left Jackson at 7:30, highway patrol escort, 3 vehicles, ETA Calvary Creek, 10 a.m. Hensley? At the station since 6. He's been making calls all morning. Corbin's there too. They're coordinating, which means they're panicking. And Faye Chilton? Drove from Jackson last night. She's at the diner on Route 8, waiting for my call. A G investigator, fully briefed on both the civil rights complaint and our operation. She received a federal coordination memo at midnight, courtesy of the assistant director. Lorraine checked her watch. We've got 90 minutes to decide how this plays. It plays clean. Callan buttoned the shirt, tucked it in. The governor arrives. He asks to see me. Hensley either produces me or explains why he can't. If he produces me, Ware sees the bruise, sees the trash trailer, asks questions. I answer honestly, up to the point where you introduce yourself and present the declassification memo. If Hensley tries to block the visit, the governor's advance team contacts the highway patrol, who contacts the AG, who contacts you. Either way, the reveal happens before noon. Lorraine nodded. And the evidence? We present it at the community center. Neutral ground. Governor, AG investigator, highway patrol as security. Not in Hensley's building, not in Osgood's courtroom. Public, documented, on the record. I'll set it up. She paused at the door. Callan, you held for 46 days without contact, without backup, without anyone knowing you were federal. That's the job. He said it without inflection. But his hand, reaching for his coffee mug, trembled once, just once, before steadying. Lorraine saw it, said nothing. Left, 9:47 a.m. Calvary Creek stirred, not with the usual morning shuffle of pickups heading to the plant and school buses rattling over potholes. Something else, something unprecedented in the 40-year memory of the town. A Mississippi Highway Patrol cruiser rolled through Main Street, lights off but presence unmistakable. Then a second, then a black Suburban with state flags on the front fenders and tinted windows that reflected the morning sun like obsidian. People came to their porches, stood in doorways, leaned out of the hardware store and the barber shop and the pecan growers co-op to watch three vehicles they'd never seen in this town process down Main Street, turn onto Cedar Lane, and continue toward Tiller Road. Miss Odette Gaskin was already on her porch. She'd put on her church dress, lavender with a lace collar. Because when the governor of Mississippi comes to your street, you dress for the occasion. The motorcade stopped in front of Callan's trailer. Governor Mitchell Ware stepped out of the Suburban. He was 58, tall, silver-templed, wearing a navy suit that cost more than the trailer's annual rent. He moved with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 30 years entering rooms where he was the most important person present. His chief of staff, a younger woman with a tablet and an earpiece, flanked his left side. Two highway patrol officers took positions on either side of the vehicles without being told. Ware looked at the trailer, looked at the dead grass and the cinder block step and the rust-edged Silverado in the driveway. His expression was carefully neutral. Politicians learn early not to let their faces react before their brains catch up. He walked to the door, knocked, 3 times, measured, respectful. Callan opened it. The first thing Ware saw was the bruise. It had faded from purple to a mottled yellow-green, but it was visible above the collar of the dark blue shirt, a handprint's aftermath, mapped across the right shoulder and climbing toward the neck. The second thing he saw was the interior of the trailer, mostly restored, but still bearing the marks of a search that hadn't been gentle. A cabinet door hung from one hinge. A section of the kitchen counter was gouged where something had been pried up. "Mr. Briggs," Ware extended his hand. The handshake was firm, genuine, and lasted exactly the right number of seconds. "I'm Mitchell Ware. I wanted to come here personally, to thank you. That wallet contained documents I cannot afford to lose. Your honesty in returning it means more than you know." He paused. His eyes went back to the bruise. "What happened to you?" Callan had rehearsed this moment in his head since 4 a.m. How much to say, how to say it. The balance between honesty and operational necessity, between the man who wanted to tell the truth and the agent who understood the truth, was a weapon that had to be deployed at the right moment, in the right sequence, or it misfired. "Governor, with respect, there are things about this situation you need to hear, but not here, not without my supervisor present." Ware's expression shifted. Not anger, recalibration. Supervisor was a word that didn't belong in the mouth of a handyman, living in a rented single wide. "Your supervisor?" The government sedan's door opened. Lorraine Purcell stepped out, badge holder already in her hand. Gold shield catching the Mississippi sun, letters visible from 10 feet. "Governor Ware." She approached with the measured stride of someone presenting credentials that rearrange the power dynamics of every room they enter. "I'm Lorraine Purcell, Group Supervisor, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, Memphis Field Division." She turned to Callan. "And this is Special Agent Callan Briggs, badge number 4471. He's been embedded in Bolivar County for 3 months as part of Operation Ironweed, a federal investigation into illegal firearms trafficking through licensed dealers in the Mississippi Delta." She paused to let the words settle. "The department that arrested him for returning your wallet, Governor, is the same department we've been building a case against. If you've been waiting for this moment, where the truth finally lands, hit subscribe now, because what happens in the next 15 minutes will reshape this entire town." The silence that followed lasted long enough for a mockingbird to sing 3 notes from Miss Odette's pecan tree. Ware's chief of staff lowered her tablet. The highway patrol officers shifted their weight. Miss Odette, standing on her porch 70 yards away, pressed both hands to her mouth. Ware looked at Callan, looked at the badge now visible in Callan's hand. He'd taken it from his pocket while Lorraine spoke, holding it open the way federal agents are trained to present credentials: steady, visible, unmistakable. "Agent Briggs." Ware's voice was controlled, but the muscles in his jaw were doing work. "You returned my wallet. You were arrested for it. And you've been in this town, undercover, investigating the people who arrested you." "Yes, sir. And that bruise on your shoulder. The search that did this?" He gestured at the trailer's interior. "To your home. The charges. All of it. While you were a federal officer." "Yes, sir." Ware turned to his chief of staff. His voice was quiet. The kind of quiet that carries more authority than volume. "Get me the Attorney General on the phone. Right now." Natalie Voss had the AG's office on the line within 4 minutes. Ware walked to the edge of the lot, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low tones that his security detail could hear but couldn't decipher. His free hand gestured, short, controlled motions that carried the vocabulary of executive authority. He paced for 7 minutes, returned with an expression that had shifted from cold fury to something more dangerous. "Purpose. We're convening a meeting. Neutral ground. This man's department, this man's courtroom. We're not using either. Agent Briggs, is there a public building in this town that isn't controlled by the sheriff?" "The community center. Corner of Main and Pecan." "Natalie, send for Sheriff Hensley. Tell him the governor of Mississippi is requesting his presence at 11 a.m. Tell him attendance is not optional." Miss Odette watched from her porch as the motorcade reversed down Tiller Road, followed by Lorraine's sedan and the ATF SUV. The procession moved through Calvary Creek with the gravitational pull of something historic. People standing on lawns, in doorways, leaning against truck beds, watching vehicles with state flags and federal plates navigate streets that had never hosted anything more important than a 4th of July parade. Word reached Hensley at 10:22. Jolene called his cell, her last official act before the world shifted. "The governor's chief of staff just called the office. He wants you at the community center." 11 a.m. She said it wasn't a request. Hensley stood in his office bathroom, adjusting service bars that suddenly felt like weights rather than decorations. The face staring back at him was the face of a man running calculations he couldn't make balance. The wallet, the arrest, the planted gun, the video, the AG's inquiry, and now the governor, in person, in his jurisdiction, asking questions he didn't have answers for. He straightened his collar, clipped his badge, walked to his cruiser with the stride of a man heading to his own sentencing hearing, and pretending it was a meeting. The Calvary Creek Community Center smelled like floor wax and folding chairs. The fluorescent lights hummed the same frequency as the ones in the county jail, a detail Callan noticed and filed away with the dark humor of someone who'd spent too many hours under both. By 11:15 a.m., the building held more power per square foot than it had in its entire 40-year existence. Governor Mitchell Ware sat at the head of a folding table that had been set up by his advance team with the kind of improvised formality that happens when state authority arrives in places not designed to receive it. His chief of staff, Natalie Voss, sat to his left, tablet recording, earpiece transmitting to the state police command post established in the parking lot. To the governor's right, Faye Chilton, Mississippi Attorney General's office. Late 40s, wire-rimmed glasses, a legal pad already half filled with notes from a briefing Lorraine had delivered in the diner parking lot 2 hours earlier. Beside her, Deacon Amos Sable, invited by the governor's staff as a community representative, wearing his Sunday collar and carrying the leather satchel that seemed to contain the accumulated documentation of every injustice in the Delta. Lorraine Purcell occupied the far end of the table, with Callan at her side. The ATF evidence case, sealed, cataloged, chain of custody documented, sat between them. 2 Mississippi Highway Patrol officers stood at the doors, not ceremonial, functional. Their presence was a message. This proceeding operates under state and federal authority, not county. Sheriff Wade Hensley arrived at 11:23, accompanied by Deputy Nash Corbin. Hensley wore his dress uniform, the one reserved for funerals and press conferences, pressed and pinned with 20 years of service bars that suddenly looked like evidence rather than decoration. He stopped 2 steps inside the door when he saw the room. His eyes moved from the governor to Chilton to Lorraine to the ATF case to Callan, and stopped. Callan sat in the same folding chair that could have come from any church basement in Mississippi. But he wasn't the handyman anymore. Wasn't the outsider from Jackson. Wasn't the thief, the suspect, the boy. He was wearing federal credentials on a lanyard around his neck and sitting beside a group supervisor who outranked every law enforcement officer in the county. Hensley's face went through a sequence of emotions that he couldn't control fast enough to hide. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and then the cold arrival of understanding. The handyman was federal. The man he'd arrested, shoved, framed, and jailed was an agent of the United States government. Corbin saw it faster than Hensley did. His eyes locked onto the ATF lanyard, read the credentials, and the blood drained from his face in a single downward rush that left his skin the color of old paper. His hand went to the back of a folding chair, not to sit, but to steady himself. The former Army MP, who had processed Callan's fingerprints hard enough to pop his knuckles, who had pulled his collar down for a booking photo, who had read 305 short like a punchline, that man understood with sudden nauseating clarity that every one of those acts had been performed against a federal officer conducting an authorized undercover operation, and every one of them was documented. "Sheriff Hensley, Deputy Corbin." Ware's voice filled the room without effort. "Please sit down." They sat. Corbin's hands were flat on his thighs, pressing hard enough to whiten the knuckles. Hensley's jaw was set in a rigid line that suggested his teeth were clenched behind his lips. "I invited Judge Osgood to participate," Ware continued. "He declined. His office sent word this morning that he is recusing himself from all matters related to the Briggs case, effective immediately. Cited personal conflict under 28 U.S.C. Section 455. Lorraine opened the evidence case. Governor Investigator Chilton. What follows is a summary of documented evidence collected over 3 months by Special Agent Briggs during Operation Ironweed, supplemented by records obtained through the AG's inquiry and civilian documentation. I'll present each item with authentication," she began. The first receipt landed like a stone dropped into still water. Exhibit 1. Property Loss Report. Office of the Governor, State of Mississippi. Filed August 12, 2024. Reference number GOV-PL-2024-0-8-12. Item: brown leather wallet belonging to Governor Mitchell Ware. Cash contents as reported by the Governor. $817. Lorraine set the document on the table, turned it so Hensley could see the number. Sheriff Hensley's intake count, documented in his own incident report. Incident Report 2024-BV-0-8-11, lists $512. The discrepancy is $305. The Governor reported $817. Agent Briggs stated $817 at the time of return. The only count that differs is Sheriff Hensley's. Hensley didn't speak. His attorney, a Greenville defense lawyer named Carson Geist, who'd been retained at 7 a.m. that morning, leaned in and whispered something. Hensley shook his head once. Exhibit 2. Lorraine set a USB drive beside the document. Body cam footage. Deputy Nash Corbin, badge 406. August 11, 2024. Duration, 11 minutes, 42 seconds. File authenticated by ATF Digital Forensics. Hash value verified against Bolivar County server backup. She read from a transcript. Timestamp 1437. Deputy Corbin on scene at Cedar Lane. Audio capture. Sheriff says you stole 305 from a wallet. Deputy Corbin is executing an arrest at 1437. The dispatch log, Bolivar County entry 7419, lists the complaint time as 1445. Deputy Corbin arrived on scene and began the arrest 18 minutes before the complaint was officially logged. She set the dispatch log beside the USB drive. Exhibit 3. Dispatch log amendment history, retrieved from the county's automatic backup server, a system that archives digital entries every 60 seconds and cannot be manually edited. Entry 7419 shows 3 versions. Original timestamp 1409. First Amendment to 1415, authorized by J. Fry. Reason given, clerical correction. Second Amendment to 1420, authorized by J. Fry. Reason, system error correction. Neither amendment was reviewed by a supervisor. Both occurred after the AG's office initiated its records request. Chilton looked up from her legal pad. Ms. Fry is aware that altering official records after a state inquiry has been initiated constitutes obstruction under Mississippi Code 25-1-117? Lorraine's answer was a new document on the table. Exhibit 4. Federal context. Under 18 U.S.C. Section 1519, Falsification or alteration of records in connection with a federal investigation carries a penalty of up to 20 years. Operation Ironweed is a federal investigation. Any records related to Agent Briggs's arrest, detention, or charges fall within its scope. The room absorbed this. Exhibit 5. Lorraine pulled a tablet from the case and pressed play. The video was grainy. Cell phone footage shot at night from 70 yards, lit by cruiser headlights. But it showed what it showed. A man in a Bolivar County Sheriff's uniform walking to a cruiser's trunk, removing a paper bag, entering a trailer, and 90 seconds later, a deputy emerging from the same trailer holding a firearm. Recorded by Odette Gaskin, civilian witness, from her porch at... Lorraine checked her notes. 23:16 on August 19th. 2 minutes, 18 seconds. Mrs. Gaskin provided the original video to Deacon Sable, who transmitted it to the AG's office and the NAACP state chapter. Hensley's attorney leaned in again. This time Hensley responded, not to his lawyer, but to the room. That video doesn't show what you think it shows. The bag contained evidence collection equipment, gloves, bags, standard procedure for a search operation. Lorraine didn't argue. She set another document on the table. Exhibit 6. The .38 caliber revolver recovered during the search. Serial number matching a weapon reported stolen in Sunflower County on June 14th. Was logged into Bolivar County evidence storage on August 20th under property tag BV 2024-08-2009. She paused. When the AG's office requested the weapon for independent ballistic analysis 4 days ago, the property room reported it was transferred to the State Crime Lab on August 22nd. The Mississippi State Crime Lab has no record of receiving it. The transfer paperwork lists no transporting officer, no receiving technician, and no chain of custody signature. She looked directly at Hensley. The weapon you claim was found in Agent Briggs's trailer, a weapon that Agent Briggs states was planted during the search, has disappeared from your evidence room. The documentation for its transfer is incomplete to the point of non-existence. Hensley's face was the color of concrete. His attorney whispered urgently. Hensley pulled his arm away. I want my union representative. I'm not saying another word without union counsel present. Ware leaned forward. Sheriff, your union representative can be present at any formal proceeding. This is not a trial. This is a briefing. But I want you to understand something. He placed both palms flat on the table. I walked into this town 90 minutes ago to thank a young man for returning my wallet. Instead, I found a federal agent, bruised, framed, jailed, and stripped of his livelihood by the department that was supposed to protect this community. Whatever procedural protections you're entitled to, you will receive. But the days of this department operating without oversight are over. He turned to Chilton. Investigator Chilton, what are your next steps? Chilton closed her legal pad. She spoke with the measured precision of someone who understood that every word she said in this room would appear in a future court transcript. Governor, the Attorney General's office is opening a formal investigation into the Bolivar County Sheriff's Department under Mississippi Code, annotated Section 25-1-117, malfeasance in office. Sheriff Hensley is being placed on administrative leave effective immediately, pending the outcome of this investigation. Deputy Corbin is suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending a separate disciplinary review. Department operations will be administered by the Mississippi Highway Patrol under emergency authority until an interim sheriff is appointed by the county board. She turned to Corbin, who hadn't spoken a single word since entering the building. Deputy Corbin, your attorney has been in contact with this office. I understand you may be willing to cooperate with the investigation. That cooperation will be taken into account during the charging decision. But I advise you, cooperation means complete, truthful disclosure. If we find discrepancies between your statements and the evidence, any agreement is void. Corbin nodded. Once, his face was gray. Lorraine placed the final document on the table. Exhibit 7. A TF Operation Ironweed. Summary Intelligence Report. Over 3 months, Agent Briggs documented 47 straw firearm purchases conducted through 2 licensed dealers in Bolivar County. 9 transport runs were logged with GPS coordinates and photographic evidence. Deputy Corbin was photographically identified at 3 transfer sites. Sheriff's Department vehicles, identified by plate number and unit marking, were present at 4 additional transfers. The weapons moved through a distribution network that utilized a shell company, Delta Agricultural Supply LLC, which leases warehouse space from a local property holding, Ewing Properties LLC. She didn't name Patrice. Didn't need to. The connection sat in the room like a third party. Federal arrest warrants for violations of 18 U.S.C. Section 922, A, 1, A, dealing firearms without a federal firearms license, are being prepared by the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District of Mississippi. Additional charges under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law, are under review for actions taken against Agent Briggs during his detention. The scope of this investigation is ongoing. Hensley stood. His chair scraped against the linoleum with a sound like a last word. "I've served this county for 20 years. His voice was hoarse, stripped of the authority that had sustained it. "I've kept this town safe. I've kept order. Whatever happened with that wallet, with that search, it was procedure. It was my department doing its job." Nobody in the room responded. The silence was its own verdict. His attorney touched his arm. They walked toward the door. A highway patrol officer stepped aside, not blocking, not deferring, just marking the exit of a man whose authority had evaporated in the span of 45 minutes. Corbin followed. He paused at the door, turned, and looked at Callan. Their eyes met for the first time since the morning on Cedar Lane. The arrest, the handcuffs, the math says you're 305 short. Corbin's expression held something that might have been the beginning of understanding, or the beginning of regret. It was impossible to tell which. He left without speaking, but Hensley, who had been walking 2 steps behind his attorney, stopped at the threshold, turned, looked at Callan with an expression stripped of every performance he'd ever given. No bluster, no authority, no calculated menace. Just a man seeing the full scope of his miscalculation for the first time. "You sat in my jail." Hensley's voice was low, almost private. 2 weeks. You sat in my jail and you could have ended it any time." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" Callan held his gaze. "Because the case was more important than my comfort, and because every hour I spent in that cell was another hour you spent incriminating yourself." Hensley's face tightened around the eyes and loosened around the mouth, as if 2 different emotions were fighting for control, and neither was winning. His attorney gripped his elbow and steered him through the door. The community center doors closed. Outside, the sound of car engines starting. Inside, the hum of fluorescent lights and the quiet scratch of Chilton's pen on her legal pad. Ware turned to Callan. "Agent Briggs, I came here to thank you for your honesty. I find that your honesty runs considerably deeper than a returned wallet." He stood, extended his hand again. This time, the handshake carried something different from the one at the trailer door. Not gratitude, but acknowledgement, recognition from one servant of the state to another. "Is there anything you need from my office?" Callan thought for a moment. "Miss Odette Gaskin put up bond money twice to get me out of jail. $500 the first time, $500 the second. She was saving for a water heater. If the state has a victim's restitution fund, consider it done." Ware nodded to Voss, who made a note on her tablet. "And Agent Briggs, the charges, both of them." Chilton answered. "The petty larceny charge will be dismissed. The governor's own property report contradicts the basis for the complaint. The firearms possession charge will be dismissed. The weapon has disappeared from evidence custody, and the chain of custody is fatally compromised. Both dismissals will be filed with the municipal court this week, and given Judge Osgood's recusal, a visiting judge from Hinds County will preside." Callan nodded. The weight of 14 days in a cell, 2 arrests, a planted weapon, a bruised shoulder, and the slow erosion of everything the town thought he was. All of it settled into the space between his shoulder blades and stayed there. Not gone, just reorganized, filed in the part of him that carried the costs of every operation, every cover, every night spent in a place that wasn't home pretending to be someone who didn't matter. The governor's motorcade departed at 12:38 p.m. 3 vehicles, highway patrol escort, the Mississippi state flag catching the wind as they turned onto Route 8 and disappeared into the Delta haze. Calvary Creek stood still for a long time afterward. People on porches, people in doorways, people who had crossed the street to avoid Callan Briggs 2 weeks ago, now standing in the road, watching the dust settle, trying to understand what had just happened to their town. The next 17 days moved at the speed of institutions, but the hours immediately following the community center meeting moved with a different velocity. The velocity of a town realizing that the ground beneath it had shifted. The highway patrol's first act was to secure the sheriff's department building. 2 troopers at the door, one at the evidence room, one at the records office. Jolene Fry was asked to hand over her keys and passwords. She complied without argument, face the color of chalk, hands trembling as she removed the lanyard from around her neck and set it on the dispatch counter she'd controlled for 22 years. Hensley's office was sealed with evidence tape at 12:51 p.m. His personal effects, a coffee mug, 3 framed rotary commendations, a photograph of himself shaking hands with the previous governor, remained inside, visible through the glass window, like artifacts in a museum exhibit about power misused. Corbin surrendered his weapon and badge at 1:15 p.m. The process was clinical. A highway patrol sergeant inventoried each item, photographed them, issued a receipt. Corbin signed in silence. His wife waited in the parking lot in a minivan with 2 children in car seats, watching through the windshield as her husband walked out, carrying a cardboard box of personal belongings and wearing civilian clothes for the first time in 11 years. The town reacted the way small towns react to the sudden removal of the power structure they've organized their lives around, with shock, relief, confusion, and the particular anxiety of people who don't yet know what comes next. At the plant, the afternoon shift worked in near silence. At the general store, Mabel Crane sold 3 times her normal volume of coffee because people weren't coming for coffee. They were coming for proximity to information, for the comfort of standing near other people who were equally bewildered. Miss Odette held court on her porch, not by design. She was simply there, as she always was, and people came to her the way they'd always come. She told them what she knew. The handyman was a federal agent. The sheriff stole $305. The search was a setup. The gun was planted. She had it on video. "I knew something wasn't right about that boy," said the barbershop owner, the same man who'd spit near Callan's boots on the sidewalk. "He was too calm, too steady. You could tell he was somebody." Miss Odette looked at him with the patience of a woman who had survived 78 years by recognizing the difference between hindsight and integrity. "You could tell he was a human being. That should have been enough." The barbershop owner didn't have a response for that. Sheriff Wade Hensley was placed on paid administrative leave, paid because the union contract required it during the investigation period. His attorney, Carson Geist, filed motions to block ATF evidence on jurisdictional grounds, arguing that Operation Ironweed's surveillance had been conducted without Bolivar County's knowledge or consent, and therefore any evidence derived from it was inadmissible in state proceedings. The motion was assigned to a visiting judge. The hearing was scheduled for October 14th, then postponed to November 3rd. The legal system moved at the speed it always moved, slowly enough to exhaust anyone who wasn't being paid by the hour. Deputy Nash Corbin was suspended without pay. His cooperation agreement with the AG's office was sealed, but sources told the Jackson Clarion Ledger that Corbin was providing detailed testimony about departmental practices over a period of years. What that testimony contained and whether it implicated anyone beyond Hensley remained unknown. His attorney negotiated. The AG's office evaluated. The clock ran. Jolene Fry resigned from the Bolivar County Sheriff's Department on September 1st, 4 business days after the community center meeting. Her resignation letter, obtained through a public records request, cited personal reasons and thanked the department for 22 years of dedicated service. She was not charged. The AG's office stated that her dispatch log alterations were under review as part of the broader investigation, language that left the door open for future prosecution while effectively closing it in the present. She moved to Tupelo, changed her phone number, did not respond to press inquiries. Judge Theodore Osgood filed his retirement papers on September 28th, 3 days before the Mississippi Commission on Judicial Performance was scheduled to begin its preliminary inquiry into the search warrant he'd signed, the continuance he'd denied, and the bond he'd set. Retirement, under state rules, did not automatically terminate the inquiry, but without a sitting judge to discipline, the Commission's practical authority was limited to a written finding that would join a file nobody outside legal academia would ever read. Osgood's attorney issued a statement. Judge Osgood served Bolivar County with distinction for 30 years and is retiring to spend time with his family. He denies any wrongdoing and looks forward to the Commission's findings. He retained his full pension, 30 years of service, vested, the system's immune response, absorb the threat, protect the body, seal the wound. Patrice Ewing was not charged with any crime. The connection between her property holdings and Delta Agricultural Supply LLC was documented in the ATF filing, but leasing warehouse space to a legally registered company was not, in itself, illegal, even if that company turned out to be a front for firearms trafficking. Federal auditors froze the lease agreements pending the investigation, and Patrice's county contracts, including the pecan plant's agreement to process the Harvest Cooperative's crop, were placed under review by the county board. But the board was the same board that had operated under Hensley's influence for 2 decades, and under review was a designation that could persist indefinitely without consequence. Patrice remained in Calvary Creek, remained chair of the co-op, remained the largest employer in town. Her lawyer released a statement expressing full confidence in Ms. Ewing's integrity and cooperation with all lawful inquiries. She did not speak publicly. The planted .38 revolver, the weapon that had been the basis for Callan's felony charge, was never found. The property room log showed it entering storage on August 20th and being transferred on August 22nd. No receiving signature existed. No transporting officer was named. The state crime lab confirmed it had never arrived. The AG's office opened a separate investigation into evidence handling at the Bolivar County property room, an investigation that required cooperation from the very department being investigated. Progress was slow. The weapon became a ghost. Evidence of evidence tampering that could not itself be physically proven. A closed loop of institutional failure that protected the people it was designed to hold accountable. A TF pulled Callan from Calvary Creek on September 3rd. Operation Ironweed continued under a replacement agent dispatched from the Memphis field office, a woman whose cover identity and backstory Callan never learned, because compartmentalization was the immune system of undercover work, and knowing too much about the next operative was a vulnerability neither of them could afford. Lorraine debriefed him in the Memphis field office over 3 days. 14 hours of recorded testimony, evidence review, and operational assessment. The case file was thick enough to fill a banker's box. Surveillance photos, GPS logs, transaction records, audio captures, and Callan's handwritten field journal. 73 pages of abbreviations and coded entries that the forensics team decoded and cross-referenced with FFL dealer records. "We've got enough for indictments on the straw purchases," Lorraine told him on the final day of debriefing. The conference room smelled like old coffee and printer toner. "Hensley and Corbin are named as co-conspirators. 2 FFL holders are cooperating. They flipped when the warrants were served. The third is still unidentified." "The crate," Callan said. "The one being loaded during my arrest. Plate number Bravo Victor 7311, the Shell Company. Delta Agricultural Supply LLC. Registered in Delaware. Operating address listed as a P.O. box in Greenville. We trace the signatory, initials WRH, not Wade Hensley. Different middle initial. Could be a relative. Could be a fiction. The financial trail leads through 3 more LLCs before it dead ends in a bank account that hasn't been active in 7 months. So someone knew to shut it down. Someone knew. Someone planned ahead. Someone was smarter than Hensley, which, granted, is not the highest bar, but it means the pipeline has a layer we haven't reached. Callan sat with this. 3 months of his life, the oatmeal breakfast, the pre-dawn runs, the porches in the hardware store, and the cell and the zip ties, and the boot between his shoulder blades, had peeled back a significant layer of the operation. But significant wasn't complete. The third FFL, the WRH signatory, the layer above Hensley, all of it remained in the territory of inference and suspicion, rather than evidence and indictment. What happens to Miss Odette? The question surprised him even as he asked it. Operational debriefs weren't supposed to include personal concerns, but Calvary Creek wasn't supposed to include any of what had happened, and some protocols had already been broken past repair. The governor's office is processing restitution for her bond payments, both amounts, and the county is covering the cost of a new water heater through a community services grant that, coincidentally, was approved 3 days after the governor's visit. Callan allowed himself a half smile. It was the first one in longer than he could remember. Before leaving Bolivar County, Callan drove back to Tiller Road one final time. He stopped first at the Calvary Creek Community Center. Deacon Amos Sable was there, sitting on the same bench where 30 years prior he'd waited to register black voters who were told by the county clerk that the registration machine was broken. The machine had been broken for 9 days straight. On the 10th, the NAACP filed an injunction. On the 11th, the machine was miraculously repaired. Sable rose when Callan pulled up. Walked to the truck with the same measured stride he'd used at the courthouse. Unhurried, deliberate, the gait of a man who had learned that haste was the enemy of dignity. "Mr. Briggs? Or should I say, Agent Briggs?" "Callan is fine." Sable nodded. He reached into his leather satchel and pulled out a folded newspaper. The Jackson Clarion Ledger, 3 days old, with a below-the-fold headline, "Bolivar County Sheriff placed on leave amid federal investigation." "Page 4, Sable said. 4, not the front page, not the headline. Page 4, below a story about a catfish festival in Yazoo City. He folded the paper and tucked it back into the satchel. That's what systemic corruption looks like in the news cycle. A page 4 story. Easy to miss, easier to forget. "It won't be forgotten," Callan said. "The federal case is moving. The AG has the evidence. I know, and I'll be here when it moves. I've been here for 31 years. I'll be here for 31 more, if the Lord sees fit." Sable extended his hand. Not the handshake of a politician or a bureaucrat. the handshake of a man who had measured another man's character by his worst days and found it sufficient. You did something rare, son. You told the truth in a place where truth has a price, and you paid that price without complaint. People notice that, even when they pretend they don't. Callan shook his hand, held it. Let go. Take care of Miss Odette. Miss Odette takes care of herself, always has. But I'll keep an eye out. Sable paused. You know, she told me once that she knew you were something more than a handyman. I asked her how she knew. She said, a man who measures 3 times doesn't make mistakes, and a man who doesn't make mistakes isn't practicing. He's performing. He smiled. 78 years old and sharper than half the investigators I've worked with. Callan drove from the community center to Tiller Road. The trailer was empty. He'd packed the duffel bag, the toolbox, and the few personal items that constituted 3 months of a life that wasn't his. The landlord in Cleveland had been notified by a form letter from the ATF legal department. The cinder block step still sat by the front door, unmoved, like a monument to temporary things. Miss Odette was on her porch. Same rocking chair. Same quiet posture. She'd been there when he arrived 3 months ago, a stranger with a duffel bag and a rusted truck, and she was there now as he prepared to leave. He walked across the road, stood at the bottom of her porch steps. The screen door he'd rehung was still tight on its hinges. The boards he'd replaced were already weathering into the color of the originals, becoming part of the structure as if they'd always been there. I knew you weren't just a handyman. Miss Odette rocked slowly, looking not at him but at the horizon, the way old people look at things they've seen change 100 times. Nobody makes bed corners like that unless somebody taught them to. And nobody sits that still in a jail cell unless they've sat still in worse places. Callan didn't confirm or deny. Some covers, even broken ones, deserve the dignity of a quiet retirement rather than a full confession. Thank you for posting my bond. Both times. I'll pay you back. The governor already did. She stopped rocking, looked at him directly. But you don't owe me money, Callan Briggs. You owe me a promise. Name it. This town needed someone to prove that telling the truth still matters, even when the people in charge don't want to hear it. You did that. Now promise me you'll keep doing it, wherever they send you next, however long it takes. He looked at her. 78 years old, living alone, saving water heater money in a coffee can, and still willing to post bail for a stranger because she believed honesty was worth more than safety. Yes, ma'am. She nodded once, resumed rocking, turned her gaze back to the horizon. He drove away from Tiller Road at 8:47 a.m. on September 3rd. The Silverado's engine knocked and shuddered the way it always had, a sound he'd come to associate with the particular loneliness of deep cover, where the vehicle you drive and the clothes you wear and the name people call you are all borrowed, and the only thing that belongs to you is the work. Calvary Creek shrank in the rearview mirror. The water tower, the grain elevator, the Ewing Pekin processing plant, its smokestack sending a thin thread of smoke into a sky that was the same blue it had been the day he arrived, and the day he was arrested, and every day in between. He didn't look back again. 3 weeks later, the Mississippi Attorney General announced a pattern or practice investigation into the Bolivar County Sheriff's Department under state authority, parallel to the federal framework of 34 U.S.C. Section 12,601. The announcement was carried on every local news station in the Delta, shared across social media, and discussed on 2 national cable news programs that devoted a combined 14 minutes to the story before moving on to the next cycle. Governor Ware issued a public statement calling for full accountability and systemic reform in Bolivar County. The statement was applauded, it was shared, it was praised as decisive and principled. And then, as these things do, it was slowly, steadily, quietly forgotten. Sheriff Hensley's disciplinary hearing was scheduled for November, then postponed to January at the request of his defense counsel, who cited incomplete discovery. His attorney filed for a change of venue, arguing that media coverage had prejudiced the local pool. The hearing was moved to Hinds County, then postponed again. As of the most recent docket update, no new date had been set. Hensley remained on paid administrative leave, collecting a salary, retaining benefits, living in the same house he'd lived in for 23 years, 10 minutes from the office he could no longer enter. His lawn was mowed, his truck was washed. From the outside, nothing about his life had changed. Deputy Corbin's cooperation agreement remained sealed. He had not been seen in Calvary Creek since September. Whether he was in protective custody, relocated, or simply choosing to be elsewhere was a question nobody in town could answer, and few were willing to ask. Judge Osgood retired with full pension benefits on October 1st. 3 weeks before the judicial conduct inquiry was set to begin. The Commission on Judicial Performance issued a preliminary finding of sufficient cause for further review, but acknowledged that its authority over retired judges was limited in scope and remedy. Osgood's attorney called the finding procedural, not substantive. The Commission's final report was expected in 18 months. Jolene Fry was not charged. The AG's office characterized her dispatch log alterations as relevant to the ongoing investigation, a designation that kept her in legal limbo without requiring the resources of a prosecution. She remained in Tupelo, did not return calls. Patrice Ewing retained her position as chair of the Pecan Growers Cooperative. Her county contracts were reinstated in October after the county board, meeting without Hensley's influence for the first time in 2 decades, determined that no evidence of criminal conduct by Ms. Ewing had been established. The warehouse leases to Delta Agricultural Supply remained frozen, but the company itself had dissolved, its registered agent unreachable, its bank accounts closed. The planted .38 revolver was never found. The shell company signatory, WRH, was never identified. The third FFL dealer, whose inventory had supplied at least 19 of the 47 documented straw purchases, remained unknown. A TF Memphis described the lead as active but unresolved. Miss Odette Gaskin received a new water heater on September 15th, installed by a plumber from Cleveland who charged the County Community Services Fund and left without asking why a 78-year-old woman in a Delta town had suddenly become a line item in the state budget. She continued to sit on her porch each morning, watching the road, waiting for the next person who needed help finding their way. Deacon Amos Sable filed his report with the NAACP National Office on October 3rd. The report documented the arrest, detention, and civil rights violations against Callan Briggs, using his real name for the first time in any public document, and recommended federal monitoring of the Bolivar County Sheriff's Department for a period of not less than 24 months. The recommendation was noted, logged, filed. Whether it would be acted upon remained, as the legal language preferred, under advisement. The Mississippi Highway Patrol continued to administer the department, pending appointment of an interim sheriff. The appointment required a vote of the county board, which required a quorum, which required board members who were willing to be associated with the department under federal and state investigation. As of the latest reporting, no quorum had been achieved. Calvary Creek endured, the way small towns in the Delta always endure, not by transforming, but by absorbing. The scandal would become a story people told at the co-op, then a story people alluded to, then a footnote, then a silence. The plant would process pecans, the church would hold services, the children would grow up and leave or grow up and stay, and the power structures that had been shaken but not toppled would settle back into familiar patterns, like furniture rearranged by a storm and gradually pushed back to its original position by the accumulated force of habit. That was the truth about systemic change. It was not an event. It was a pressure, applied slowly over years through cases and precedents and people who refused to stop pushing. One wallet returned, one video recorded, one bond posted, one investigation opened, each one a crack in a wall that would not come down today or tomorrow or next year, but that was, incrementally, undeniably, losing its ability to hold. And in a rented apartment in Memphis, 200 miles from Calvary Creek, Callan Briggs sat at a kitchen table under a light that didn't buzz. The apartment was temporary, they always were. Furnished with someone else's couch and someone else's dishes, and a bed he'd made that morning with corners tucked at 45 degrees, because some habits survived every identity, every cover, every operation. The window overlooked a parking lot. The refrigerator held milk, eggs, and a jar of peanut butter that reminded him of Mabel Crane's store, and the way silence can be a form of complicity. On the table, a new case file, different county, different names, different FFL numbers and different plate numbers, and different shell companies with different initials in the signature block. But the same patterns, the same architecture of corruption, badges and weapons and money moving through channels, built to look legitimate and functioning to enrich the people who were supposed to be enforcing the law. Beside the case file, a single sheet of paper, printed, not handwritten. A TF internal memo, dated yesterday. Subject line, Operation Ironweed, Supplemental Intelligence. He'd read it 3 times. The key paragraph, Analysis of financial records associated with Delta Agricultural Supply LLC, has identified a recurring wire transfer pattern originating from an account in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. The account holder, initials WRH, does not correspond to any known associate of Sheriff Wade Hensley. However, transfer dates correlate precisely with documented straw purchase transactions over a 14-month period. Recommendation: expand investigation scope. Request authorization for Southern District subpoena. 14 months. The pipeline had been operating for at least 14 months, 11 months before Callan ever set foot in Calvary Creek. Whoever WRH was, they had been running this operation long before Hensley became useful and would likely continue long after Hensley was gone. The sheriff was a cog. The machine was bigger. Callan stared at the memo. Then he folded it, placed it inside the case file, and closed the folder. He opened the file again, read the first page of the new assignment, read the second, made a note in a new pocket notebook. Same tight abbreviations, same coded shorthand, same discipline applied to the same work in a different place. His phone buzzed. Lorraine. New cover identity is ready. You deploy in 72 hours. Small town, northeast Mississippi, lumber country. A TF has reason to believe 3 local dealers are operating a straw purchase network through a construction supply company. Sound familiar? Sounds like Tuesday. Get some rest. I mean it. She hung up. Callan set the phone down, looked at the case file, looked at the notebook, looked at his hands, the same hands that had fixed Miss Odette's porch, held a governor's wallet, and gripped a metal bench in a 6x8 cell while a fluorescent light tried to take apart his sanity 1 hertz at a time. Outside, Memphis hummed with the low-frequency energy of a city that never fully sleeps. Sirens in the distance, bass from a passing car, the constant murmur of traffic on the interstate. Inside, the apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that fills the spaces between deployments, between identities, between the person you were yesterday and the person you'll become tomorrow. He picked up his pen, opened the notebook to a fresh page. The page was blank, but not for long. And this story isn't about a wallet. It never was. It's about what happens when you do the right thing in a place where the right thing threatens the wrong people. It's about the distance between who you appear to be and who you actually are, and the cost of maintaining that distance when every system around you is designed to crush what it doesn't understand. Callan Briggs returned $817. He was arrested, framed, shoved, jailed, and stripped of his livelihood for it, and he endured all of it, not because he couldn't fight back, but because the mission required him to absorb the damage, document the truth, and wait for the moment when that truth could do the most good. That's not weakness. That's the hardest kind of strength, the kind that doesn't look like strength at all until it's too late for the people who mistook silence for surrender. Justice didn't arrive in a single moment. It arrived the way it always does, in fragments. One hearing, one suspension, one retirement that shouldn't have been allowed, one investigation that might take years to complete, one town that changed a little, not a lot, and will have to keep changing if it wants to become what it claims to be. But it started with a choice, a wallet on a curb, a man who picked it up and walked it to the people who least deserved his honesty, and gave it to them anyway. Because character isn't what you do when it's easy. Character is what you do when it costs you everything, and you do it anyway. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the next time someone tells you honesty doesn't matter, that the system is too broken, the odds too long, the price too high, remember Callan Briggs. Remember that the page was blank, and he picked up the pen. The question is, will you?
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.